We're having conversations in breakout groups. There will be an opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting, so save your comments and questions for then. So tonight, as we mentioned, the focus is going to be mostly on the housing in Region 9 tonight. We will be we will also be talking a little more. It's economic development. That'll be to start off the meeting. But before we get too much further, we need to approve the agenda and minutes or notes from last week.
I move we approve tonight's agenda.
Second,
Aye.
But let's see.
you want me to do? I'll do it. Okay, sorry. I'm focused on something else. All in favor? Opposed? Passed. There is a correction on the minutes. Dan Sinelli, not Dave Sinelli,
Okay.
in the visitors, the last meeting. Are there any other corrections to the minutes? I have a motion to accept.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Accepted.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Just a very quick few seconds of updating to the process. So as you guys know, we recently had a public review of the draft national environment strategies. The online questionnaire closed January 2nd. Because of your guys' help with outreach, Region 9 received over 220 total comments. So thank you very much. It really helps that planning process be more for everybody, right? So we really appreciate all the work you guys have done, and we appreciate every response on there. So continue to keep it up. We'll have multiple questionnaires coming out soon. Again, so like we had for the environment section, we had a drop-in. We're gonna have a drop-in session for the economy and housing at the end of January. So be on the lookout for that. We'll send out flyers and newsletters. We'll be sure to pass you guys on the flyers as well, so you guys can share. Mike?
And Mike Springer, planning and zoning, I'm looking to add on to that too. Now that we have the results of the survey, we're analyzing those internally. We'll be able to send out results to everyone. We'll post them online for the public to be able to view. We'll send them to you as soon as we can.
How do we compare to some of the other districts you've already done as far as response?
Oh, you certainly win, but for number of responses, yes. Yes.
So Mike, I talked to Eric briefly, this is Kate on Kate Bauer, about the possibility that's been requested, could we extend the time for people to respond? And would you all check and see if that's possible?
Yeah.
Even though we have really good response, this is a big issue in this part of the county and we'd like to have everybody's voice heard.
Yeah, we can check it out.
Thank you.
Nicole, just for the record, I did it yesterday and it was still open. Even though the closing date is the second.
Good. Second.
And then the quick teaser for results too is that it's for all the strategies, there was very strong overwhelming support. I think this is, as you said, this is an issue that we know is very important to this region. So we got a lot of positive response.
So again, just to continue on very briefly again, this is the overall schedule in 7 quick bullet points. One thing I will mention, I know we talked about having a recap meeting that kind of discuss the first 4 topical meetings. I know we're planning for a second meeting in February, but we're actually gonna have that meeting in March. We can talk more about that later, but I just want you guys to be aware that the regularly scheduled meeting for March will now be our recap meeting. Again, more information will be provided later and maybe tonight as well.
So just to clarify, you're thinking you won't need a second meeting in February?
Correct. Right now, we are not planning for a second meeting in February.
Thank you.
And so tonight, again, housing and redevelopment. One thing that we just want to emphasize as staff is every time you guys say, let's do more of this, or let's see this, what about this? We're taking notes, we're writing it down, and we're sharing, we're trying to share that with you and through the strategies we put online. And one thing we'll talk about here in a little bit is there's a piece of paper in front of you that shows the economic, some of the economic draft strategies we've created to this point. These are continually working. We're working with AAEDC and other agencies to see if there's more we can add. But we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but we just want you guys to be aware that everything you guys say, everything you guys think of, we're taking note, we're trying to share that and make sure we're hearing you correctly. So yeah, without further ado, we do have a special presentation tonight from yours truly, Kate Bauer. So this is the presentation she came up with. She wanted to talk to you guys all for a few minutes, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you. And I can't take credit for this. I've been talking to a number of people since we've been meeting about the issues and challenges we're facing and how the process is unfolding. And one of the people I've talked with a lot is a local architect by the name of Dan Sinelli. And Dan, I had asked to give this presentation, but Dan came down with COVID yesterday. So I'm Dan for the moment. I think following the last meeting, we noticed that we didn't cover everything that we thought we ought to. We looked at the topic writ large. So one of the things that I'm hoping I won't screw up how we advance this, because I don't know about that, but one of the things that we've been talking about. This one, just. Oh,
There, yeah.
okay, is the idea of convergence and how we can get the parts to be collectively greater than the sum. That we can get more value if we think about things from a different perspective than simply thinking about it as we have traditionally. Typically, planning often is focused in silos. And our meetings have been set up in silos. We're going to talk about review data and analyze information about things like transportation, public education, housing, economic development, land use, master planning. Those are all silos. And they all tend to make us think inside of a box. So my challenge for us tonight is for us to think about things from a broader lens, not just to talk about the topic at hand, okay? So at our last meeting, as an example, we talked about information about education. And we looked at the major capital projects in education and recurring projects. Those were the boxes that the data was presented in. What I'd like us to think about is almost a matrix look at these elements. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing. You were able to see this if you got your advanced material. But if you look at the cross pieces, if you think about public education and what it means for transportation, what does mixed use do for how education is factored? If we think about smaller housing types, if we think about ADUs, if we look at the data about how the population in this part of the county is going, only half of the houses, the residents, have children under 18. We have the highest percentage of retirees in any part of the county. What does that suggest in terms of A, the kind of future housing we need, and B, what that means in terms of how we build schools or what schools look like? Should we be building schools under the traditional old footprint? Should we think about them in a different way? Maybe they have schools and libraries and residential and parks all in the same area. As opposed to here's a school, here's a park, here's a library, and here's houses. So to think about these in a different way. If we look at transportation again and think about mixed use housing, that means not everybody has to have a car to do everything. That means that we can use more public transportation or more walking to get to things. So I want to show you a couple of examples of where that's happened effectively, just to kind of get you thinking outside the box. So in 2016, Chicago decided they had an opportunity to revitalize the older libraries by co-locating them with housing. And by 2019, they had 3 libraries that had housing attached, connected. In Mount Airy, the downtown is being redeveloped with a much more walkable plan and a real combination of factors, and more detail about this is available on the Mount Airy website. This is a town in England where they have taken the old Love Factory and turned it into housing, restaurants, shopping, and living space as well as craft and creative ideas. And Howard County has done an extraordinary job of thinking about things differently. They are co-located, you can't see this because of the thing in the corner. Is there a way to get that out of the picture? By the way, they do promise us it's not gonna be this full. I don't know about that. But they're co-locating schools with other public amenities such as parks, libraries, and reusing commercial real estate. They have pushed for missing middle housing and accessory dwellings. So they're looking at different ways of approaching this idea. And it's a good model for us to do. They recommend a higher portion of multifamily units than the traditional plan Howard 2030, and therefore fewer new students are expected in the system. If the housing community. We need to think about how those pieces all fit together in Region 9. One last example about the idea that the National Council of Teacher Quality says that in 15 of 69 US cities, starting teacher salaries means they can't afford a one-bedroom rental in 2022 in the communities where they teach. We saw data in our information about the availability of housing and the disconnect between income and housing. So we need, again, to be thinking more creatively. My challenge to you is very simple. Think about the opportunities for convergence on all of the topics that we talked about. Don't just stay in the silent, but say, if this, then what? What alternative ways might we think about things, and how might we add 1 and 1 to get more than 2?
Thank you, Kate.
So as promised, last meeting, we said we're gonna talk a little more about economic development. So we're gonna go through a few slides of some potential recommendations, strategies, and open up the conversation again for the economic development. I would like to caveat one thing, there's gonna be a hard stop of this conversation at 6:30, only because we're gonna have a recap meeting in March. So if we don't need to talk about everything you want to talk about today regarding economic development, bring it to the table again in March, right? So again, I'm gonna introduce Mike Stringer, and he's gonna be able to kind of walk you through what we've heard and what we're kind of planning. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Okay. So if you recall from our meeting last month, we focused very intentionally on specific areas of Region 9, kind of went by community, with real focus on those commercial and activity centers. So we could think specifically about kind of how the future could look, think about different things that could happen within these geographies. And at the end of the meeting, there was a question and comment about saying, can you talk a little bit more about economic from the systems perspective, talk about tourism or commercial fishing. So we want to recap really quickly where we were on the geographic specific ideas, and then we'll pivot over to that more systemic level. So a few of the things that we talked about last time were about those were termed village centers in Plan 2040. You might know it just as kind of commercial areas or the crossroads in Region 9, places like Edgewater, places like Deal and Galesville, Churchton. And we talked about with the folks from the Arundel Economic Development Corporation, the opportunity to apply a designation to those areas that would allow low interest or no interest loans to local businesses to help support improvements. And this group was very supportive of that idea. We also talked about as those areas are activated from Galesville and Deal in particular, we talked about when there are activities going on, events, that we get jammed up, that there's lack of parking, it's hard to get around. So we talked about the potential synergies. So when we have better parking strategies, we get ideas like sidewalks and different mobility options, so we can move around these places when there are a lot of people there congregated during weekends or events. We talked about the need to support local organizations and businesses, collaborating on marketing, hosting events and improvements. So a lot of kind of going over that tourism space and the importance of the local chambers of commerce and businesses working together to promote each other. And then we talked about the opportunity for appropriately scaled housing in these places too, as a way to kind of add activity. Churston in particular spent some time dwelling on thinking about, that's all currently commercially zoned, but what if there was some housing added in there at the right scale so that people could walk to the shopping center nearby or walk to medical services, try and create those more complete communities. And another thing about Churston, we mentioned the idea of potentially scaling down the size of what's currently mapped as the village center in Plan 2040 because I'm concerned about wetlands and other environmental features there. So those were several highlights. Again, they're written on the handout you have there. We can mull those over and refine those. And then I want to specifically kind of pivot over to this, or actually, let me check and see, was there anything big that we did see on that list?
I was gonna say, I thought about it a little bit and maybe Gerardo or some of the other headquarters people would have thoughts on this, but the idea of potentially adding in a second village center for Edgewater in that area that's down into Selby Beach there, where there's the row of businesses and then the health lodge on the other side. Cause I feel like they could potentially, like the shopping center is a little older, they could potentially benefit from those economic impacts and be able to take advantage of some monies for improvements and stuff as well. And they're kind of like the village center, I feel like, because for people on the peninsula to come out, that's probably their closest thing.
Second.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good. That's great. That's a great.
I was driving by, I was like, that's kind of the village center.
Yeah, there's some nice new businesses there, creative stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So, just in response to that, the Mayo Peninsula had a very long, involved preparation process during the preparation for the GDP. That we had something like 25% of the county's responses, and we've got like 2% of the county's population. And this question of the village center came up, and there was a proposal potentially there and potentially down further on the peninsula. And the community was strongly opposed, didn't see the benefits outweighing the problems. And the other factor here is that it's governed by the Peninsula Policy Development Area, which says no new development, only redevelopment. On all the peninsulas, Shady Side is one, ours, Annapolis Neck, all 5 peninsulas. And so we didn't see a village center, pardon me, as having been consistent with the Peninsula Policy Development recommendation or with the desires and wishes of the community.
So does that mean the existing businesses that are already there, that she was just talking about, you wouldn't want that enhanced or changed at all, leave it exactly like it is? Is that what the community wants to?
And tomorrow, there's gonna be a hearing to put 16 homes right in there beside the American Legion. So that's turning into residential, actually more than commercial. So, and that's literally right beside, and where the fruit stand is, or Peninsula Farms is, that's gonna be residential. So, it doesn't fit, I don't think, what we're looking for in the village center.
Let me ask a clarifying question. Has this group seen the Peninsula, was it called protocol?
Peninsula Policy Development Area. So it was something that we consulted. And
Somebody turn off their phone, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, everybody turn off their phone if you haven't already.
So it's called the Peninsula Policy.
Development Area. There are what, 6 or 7 of them in the GDP for different areas. And for peninsulas, it said because of the subsidence, because of the flood risk, because there's only one road in and out, that these areas should be only having infill and redevelopment. There should not be any new development in any of these peninsulas. And the code defines the 5 peninsulas, as I said, one road in, one road out. So because of the limited access, the subsidence, the stormwater, and the floodwaters. The county designated these 5 areas with those conditions. And that is only redevelopment and only infill. And nothing beyond.
So that doesn't seem to be working out very well for mayor, because you seem to be just targeted for development all the time.
Bill's killings.
Well, that development,
Well, that happens.
that development by Peninsula Farms and the American Legion, that was permitted 15 years ago. And to our knowledge, they haven't permitted anything over 5 since that was put in place. Michael, you may know more about that than I do. And there is one right now, a proposal to put 42 homes into a forest up in Glebe Heights. And, the neighbors are opposing it, saying it violates the Peninsula Policy Development Area. And by the way, it also violates the Forest Conservation Act and stormwater and a whole bunch of other provisions.
Does anybody know what year this went into place, Peninsula Policy Development
It
Area?
does with the new general development plan that's adopted in 2021. So it's the new policy addition in that plan.
So what did, this might be like throw out of context, but like.
Speak up a little bit,
If we, my name's Arundel.
Yeah.
I'm the owner of Wild Acres, but if we designated that area of Mayo as a village center, wouldn't that give us greater control over the development? Rather than just kind of being blindsided by developers doing residential? Because this would be community input for the village center, I assume, right? We would have to approve all the development that we're doing.
That's not my understanding of the village center.
I mean,
My understanding is there's no additional community input in village centers than any other. And as I said, the 16 homes there at the American Legion, they were permitted in the 2008, 2009. So there's no way those can be stopped or overturned. The development up on Glebe Heights, that was permitted 2012. The permit, they lost the permit, and the new developer is trying to say he's grandfathered, even though he's not. So we think we've got good grounds for forest conservation there. And, no, I don't think we have any additional input as citizens in what happens in the village center.
Yeah, so the village center, the policy designation in the general development plan doesn't have any more code requirements in the permitting process.
so when we were putting together the vision there, 2 of the areas we were looking at for one of these community centers was down, by Luz. And also taking advantage of the water reclamation decommission and turning that into some kind of a small commercial area community center as opposed to the 9 ball fields and almost 1,000 parking places. Yeah. So that's been in some of the discussions.
We're gonna touch back on some of this geographic stuff, especially as we get to the housing conversation later this evening. So, just kind of keeping the economic conversation moving. I want to touch back on the big topics that were brought up at the end of the meeting. These have come up in our public input throughout the years, throughout 2023 as we were engaging with the public too. And of course, there's been topics that come up in things like Envision Mayo, Envision Gale plans. So making sure that as we think about economic development, we're thinking about our traditional maritime industries, commercial fishing, agriculture as our backbones, and then tourism as kind of emerging spin on this as well. And each of these topics also get addressed or back to Plan 24, the general development plan. And so I put on the screen here the policy that talks about promoting and sustaining commercial fishing in the maritime industry, and then a set of strategies that are already adopted in Plan 2040 around, supporting the Maritime Industry Advisory Board that's hosted by the Arundel Corporation and recommendations that they come up with. That group also in 2020 commissioned a study on the economic impacts of the maritime economy. That included recommendations as well. I'll bring back to those in just a moment. And then to ensure that we continue working with maritime businesses to support them. And in particular, on workforce development, Arundel Community College is working on a maritime trades program and facility for the Arundel campus. So there's specific language in the general development plan supporting that. And we'll remind the group that we want to try not to duplicate things that are already in the general development plan, but see if there's specific things we can say about Region 9 that we want to add to that. And if there's value, otherwise we can reference these in the plan without calling it out as a new recommendation, just saying, hey, we support this and we want to see it continued on. Things that have come up in our research and conversations over 2023 about this is going back to that economic study of the maritime industry. A couple of the recommendations that I included that are relevant in this region are supporting job training programs like we have at Cat South. And also thinking about designating a county staff person to be a technical resource. The permitting process for anything, once you get, past the high line and called state and federal as well as the county regulations. So it gets to be very complicated. So having a staff liaison help be a technical resource to help navigate that process. And then we met in December with Maritime Industry Advisory Commission with the help of County Cheney, who also sits on that. And one idea that was brought up in their conversation there was to think about, can the county help support the financing program? As these waterfront businesses adapt to rising sea levels, there's going to need to be a tremendous overhaul of the maritime infrastructure, raising docks, raising bulkheads, and the capital outlay that's going to be enormous. So is there an opportunity, especially now that the county has established this resilience authority, which has more flexibility in financing than the county does? I think that could be a very useful recommendation for this group to consider. The Maritime Industry Advisory Board is still thinking about this too, maybe they come back to us later in the process with additional ideas, but it's just kind of one initial thought I share. So with that, I want to see if are there any other thoughts around maritime industry? We'll get to commercial fishing right after this. That's related but separate piece. Any other thoughts that this group would like to add?
I just have a question, and that is the supply adequate to the demand? But do we need more?
Yes.
We need more marinas,
More trained, young people to enter.
staff, I
marine
get,
trades.
talking about marinas, do we need more marinas? More capacity for boats?
I can't answer.
I would say we probably don't really need a whole lot more capacity at this point. It feels to me like what we need is just a continued redevelopment of the existing marinas to bring them to modern standards, make adjustments for sea level rise. All those sorts of things. Just take what we have, make it nicer and more modern in that regard, but more, not necessarily. I don't think that's necessary at this point.
So this third recommendation here is a really good one. We've got 7 or 8 marinas on the Mayo Peninsula,
Right,
and I would say a third of them are a mess.
yeah,
And definitely, desperately in need of upgrading and rehabbing in ways that the owners can't afford.
yeah,
So if we have some way to provide low interest loans or,
yeah,
And one of the things I think we do need to take into account, and we talked a lot about in the general development plan, was we have a lot of neighborhood marinas in South County
yes,
that are good neighbors based on how they're set up now. But if they get redeveloped and start adding housing and restaurants and events, they're not going to be good neighbors if they're at the end of a 1-lane road with houses. So there is no capacity in the zoning to address those right now.
I don't want to take us into the weeds, but Monday, the county council meeting, there was a proposal to create a new category for marinas.
It's necessary.
That would allow just small marinas with no hotels and housing. And, they'll go through the regular process, and I can't imagine anyone will say no.
That I think is emerged from the discussions we had in the 2040 plan.
Yeah.
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 But it's an indicator of how
Yeah.
we have this as part of our marine community. We want to keep them. We want to help them be effective.
Yeah.
But we don't really want to change the relationship
Yeah.
between them and the residential communities they're part of.
You have to go through the residents in order to get.
Correct.
So you start increasing volume.
So
Audrey had a comment.
Mine was about the partnership with AACC, and then just about the idea that I know as from talking with people and traveling to AACC can be a financial hardship for somebody in our area and being that age and just talking about transportation and everything. And would you be able to say something about, you would like to have a remote, like, maybe partnership with something at Cat South to have a like remote location, like they've done, satellite location, like they've done in Glen for certain trades? Have something like that, given how much marine trade is in southern and really in our region. Because I feel like a lot of people tend to like stop going to Ann Arbor County Community College, and that's like a class that you can't really take e-learning style, it's more of a hands-on stuff.
Can I have a question for you about within the context of the marine industry as a tourism draw to Southtown? Is it your sense that there is sufficient marketing and promotion about what our resources are from not only the individual marinas, but the county itself? And we're talking about economic development. How do we tell people that this is the place to come to keep their boat, as opposed to going up to the northern part of it?
I think we do a pretty good job of getting the word out there about what marine services are available in southern Anne Arundel County. I feel like, you can always do better. But to the specifics of the maritime industry, I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, that's how I feel. I think there is some opportunity for improvement. I'd have to think more specifically how we might be able to work together to figure that out. I think there are some opportunities within, the industry to do maybe a little bit of, to your question on the expansion, but, a moderate amount of use on those properties or a little bit more area. But in general, I think we just need to continue to try to make what we have better and better, and with small incremental improvements and maybe slight growth, but nothing too much.
Thank you.
Just to note, add a little bit to that recommendation about the training program, to add on that idea about the community college satellite, and with the idea of convergence in mind too. Let's hold that thought about transportation access to the community college in our next month's meeting. We're going to bring the transportation folks in to talk about bus routes and the time between those buses, the length of time it takes to get from Edgewater up to and also up to the community colleges and destination C. There's some recommendations wrapped into that too.
Absolutely, Bill Sherbo. One comment I wanted to make was, going back to something that, Kate had in her opening remarks. I think if we do some kind of a, flow chart or some kind of overlay where everything is overlapping, I think there needs to be one more, overlay over top of what is possible as far as what we can think of. What is not possible because of the way our resources are designed, our peninsulas and roads and tax base, and we can't, so some things may save us some time and not talk about them because they won't fit physically. They won't fit into our area. And the other thing I wanted to make a comment about with marine trades, I am experienced the marine industry for over 40 years in between Deal and Galesville, and even on down in the Solomons. In Coward County. And I can tell you what, and I'm sure Hamilton can tell you exactly what I am experiencing just as being in marinas all the time is there is an aging workforce in marinas. And I've experienced it in my end of the industry. I have ended up having more retired folks working for me than young kids, because maybe it goes back to demographics. We don't have the young kids in the area. And the other thing, it's just the way life is today, kids don't have time like they had when I was a kid. And between academic, the rigors that we put our kids through now and I hate to say it, but we focused an awful lot on sports with kids now. And it takes up a god awful amount of their time and their parents' time all week long. But the one thing that you can't do and is expect a college to have a college course to do this without the kids having fundamental education to feed into this. Whereas, you know, and I've had the experience with kids on my boat and my own kids. Difference between a wrench and a pair of pliers. Or, I'm, you know, very basic stuff. You can't, kids aren't taught basic mechanical skills like they were 50 years ago when I was in school. And so you can't expect somebody to go up to a college course and learn the ABYS standards instantly, because they don't have the things to make it up. And to the point where some of the marinas that I deal with, they'll take any warm body and they'll train them because they're so desperate for a warm body. So, I just wanted to add those few things to what we're talking about.
Just want to expand expand or ask a question as well. How well are we marketing the need for this? And I'll always bring race into it. I live in a Black community, my son is Black, I've never heard that this exists or this is needed.
Marinas are colorblind. I tell you, they'll take any warm
I'm
body.
not saying no, but who are we marketing to and who are we doing outreach to for these opportunities? That's the question.
If you don't know it exists, you can't go.
Exactly.
I'm gonna make a statement that probably will upset some people. But we're teaching our kids now, and we've done it over the last 20-25 years, that manual labor is bad. And because of that, these are the kinds of jobs, as well as everything that's being taught at Cat South. We as a society have moved away from manual labor, from, you know, physical labor into a service-oriented economic model. So people sitting at desks doing things. It's not a manual job anymore, right? Working with your hands as a mechanic, plumber, electrician, you know, building homes, things of that nature. And I think that's a problem. And that's why for me, Cat South and adding these kinds of programs are huge, because I talk with parents and they're like, I just learned that Cat South offers X. And I'm like, yeah, so everybody we talk to, we're like, Cat South is incredible. They're great jobs that have great pay starting right out of high school. So, and that's.
I mean, if I can, for the sake of time here, to the commercial fishing as well, that's kind of sister, industry here. And, again, we have the broad policy statements and the John Madonna plan that are supportive of that industry. And from our public input earlier, you know, in 2023, we were engaged with the public, and some things that we heard were, of course, the foundational need to protect water quality, to protect that industry. It's an important crossover as we think about connections between different topics. And also think about our own zoning code, that as we think about, you know, restrictions on uses to make sure that traditional heritage industries, like commercial fishing, can operate out of their backyards they've done for years. And kind of make sure that we're, you know, nuisance issues of that, but also thinking about ways to allow those.
But that goes with farming as well.
Yes.
So would that be like coolers and fuel trucks and stuff like that? Having,
Well, we have what is called a conditional use in the commercial, in the zoning department for commercial fishing. And we didn't have that until 20 years ago. I kind of put it on the table at the last small area plan and got it through, but we could only get it conditioned. There are a lot of things that are permitted use in the zoning regs. Selling tomatoes and eggs and having barber shops in your back half of your house and things, but at that time, commercial fishing, which has always been done down in this area. As new people moved into the area and complaints were coming about, whether it was a boat starting at 3 in the morning in the neighborhood, or stacks of crab pots in the backyard, or stacks of baskets in the driveway, or whatever, or even a refrigerated truck, on pickup truck size in somebody's driveway.
The shedding.
Somebody could drop a dime on that waterman and cause all kinds of havoc. And it happened in my neighborhood. Is what got me into this. And the other thing was, if you owned your own parcel of property on the water, you were not legally allowed to load and discharge your catch on your own pier in the county. It was illegal. If somebody complained about it. So we worked on it, we got it in the last small area plan, but it is now just a conditional use. Doesn't go into much detail as the zoning, with the zoning are here, but what needs to happen, what needs to happen is it to be, and it has to be somebody that makes their living commercial. You just can't throw a few crab pots in your front yard and say that I'm a commercial fisherman. You have to have a license and you have to prove that, this is what you do. But it would be nice to have it as a permitted use, just like a lot of other things that are permitted uses in the county now. There may have to be some sort of line between conditional and permitted use, depending on the zoning density. R5, R1 to whatever.
Do you have any idea how many commercial fishermen find themselves in that situation in South Cat?
You don't find out about it until somebody complains. Is what happens. There was a fella that older fella in my neighborhood years ago who his traps were stacked in his yard, and had machinery and oyster rigs and dredges and stuff in there. And somebody had fixed the house up down the road, and you had to drive past this guy's house all the time. So the agent dropped a dime on the county, and the guy was old, and he had to spend a couple months of money that he didn't have to clean all his whole yard up and put fences in and all kinds of stuff.
Roger, and then.
I just, looking at this, the other thing that comes to my mind is, it's been related to me that not only have there been some problems with the commercial folks having their boats and like you're stating, but also some folks sell some of their catch from their private residences. And I know some have had problems, some have had to move, some, because some of the zoning and the rules and regulations, I don't say they're scattered, but it's very fine tuned and it's very hard to follow. So some folks have said, or advised me, maybe we should look at also not only with the operations, but with the sales.
That's in there.
And to follow on, not conditional, but to make it
a permitted.
like a person gets up in the morning, they have their house, they get in their boat, they go drop it in the water, they come back, and they cook their crabs, or they sell their crabs or oysters, whatever, from their yard. So, that is the heritage industry I'm thinking
But
of.
that had, I was remiss in not saying, that is also part of what is conditional use. You can sell your catch
Right.
from your residence, whereas before you couldn't. But it would be nice, and a peace of mind, we had to have that as a permitted use, as opposed to, because if it is, the way it is now, you have to go to the county and apply. And if you have a neighbor with deep pockets that no matter what, he doesn't want to be next to a commercial fishing operation in the neighborhood. And it happened in St. Martin's a few years back. There was a guy that had a small parcel of land, and it was an old Cantler property, and there was 3 workloads tied up. And a person moved into the neighborhood and wanted that operation out of the neighborhood. It took, the county councilwoman, can't remember her name, but had to go to the county council, and it was actually, they beat the complaint, but it cost the guy that had the piece of property a lot of money.
So it sounds like one of the overarching things we're talking about in commercial fishing is finding a way to protect the heritage fishermen and the way they operate.
And I'll tell you another thing that there are less now than there used to be. Commercial guys that have waterfront property, commercial operations on the water. And what is happening to them, and I've heard more than one complaint about it, is that the land and the other residences in their waterfront communities are selling and changing hands to the point where they're very expensive. To the point where if you have waterfront property, you are taxed accordingly. And so the complaint that I hear is that you have agricultural areas that get a tax break for agricultural reasons. Because if somebody had 100-acre parcel of land, I mean, if it was zoned residential, it would be worth, a lot of money. Well, you can have a half-acre or an acre piece of land on the water, and it's worth a lot of money. And those guys are being taxed accordingly. And what's going on in this county, particularly in South County, is everything is going to the highest bidder, period. And so you don't have affordable housing, and at some point, it's gonna be cheaper for commercial fishing operations that are on the lake. And we've seen that this is a coast-wide thing. This isn't just here in Arundel County. It happens in Maine, it happens in North Carolina. They're gonna have to sell because the taxes are gonna be prohibitively expensive to just run an operation on the water. Unless there's some kind of.
Let me hear, so, from my experience, what you mentioned too about the previous one, I think it's a great issue to identify. We're not gonna be able to kind of figure out what that zoning code fix needs to be in this group. Put it in the plan, that would be the county to have a working group, get the right people on the table, help figure that out, and then hopefully lead to council, adopting legislation. I mean, certainly, if folks are supportive, we can include a recommendation to, study the potential for, a commercial fishing, property tax rate, just like the agricultural tax rate. And put that on kind of studios to study the implication of that.
I was gonna suggest that we put that
Yeah.
in with a potential to have a special program through the county if there's not already for the marine trades, like there's for agriculture, for improvements and stuff that they can apply for, their commercial, but also maybe having like a county liaison or department to help with that marine trades or with that commercial fishing industry. And also if we are able to get that long term to make sure, like not to be a devil's advocate, but there's various levels of in-home fishing operations and some are courteous and considerate and others are a little more, in different arrays.
There are bad representations in all.
So yes, and I would say that, but to have somebody whose main job is to make sure that inspect and kind of keep that piece between the commercial fisheries and the surrounding areas.
Could you go back one slide? I think that if you're talking about a representative, could be codified with in the last slide for the marina.
Yeah.
Maritime industry, because that could be rolled into that as well. So,
I mean, it really says there is a special tax code for agriculture. So there's no reason why it couldn't be one of the marine waterfront operations.
I think that's good discussion. We're gonna move on to the next.
I just have one quick question. On the small neighborhood marinas versus the big commercial marinas like Harrington Harbor, et cetera, is there any issue? Because I'm sure you guys are heavily inspected and regular, this all inspected. But on these smaller marinas, neighborhood marinas, you know, with sea level rise, the marinas are just waiting for the next accident. An oil spill, a boat sinks, diesel fuel gets in the water, all kinds of stuff happens. Do small marinas, are they as regulated as the bigger marinas for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think they are. I haven't seen a major issue with those sorts of things in small marinas versus any other marinas. I think in general, the maritime industry and more and more so as the years have gone on, have become a very, very clean industry. And the folks that boat, the boaters themselves are expecting more and more that their places that they're gonna boat are that way. You know, lots of recycling, lots of environmental practices, clean marina program, it's a state program that inspects and follows through on these things. So it's made a lot of progress, and the industry wants to be a leader in that, so that, you know, because clean water and clean air is a fundamental to the industry, much like fishing and those sorts of things. So I think the answer is it's in pretty good shape. Thank you.
Same time, we're going to push the next one, kind of agriculture and agritourism. Again, agriculture has had a key role in 2040. There's policies talking about the need to help sustain agriculture in the county. And important to note, things that have come up in these conversations that also conveyed in 2040 are supporting, you know, the evolving agricultural economy and different uses and activities that are happening on farms, like wineries and farm stays. And to note that, you know, as we read in our briefing paper and development last meeting, that, you know, the Arundel Economic Development Corporation has their ag program that provides, you know, marketing support, and has their farm rental program and loan programs, and there's other programs like that at state level from Southern Maryland Agricultural and Malditco, Maryland Agricultural Business Organization. And this also touches upon, as I said earlier, the importance of youth education and workforce training to bring the next generation of farmers up. And as we talked about this, we reached out again last month. We met with the Agricultural Commission, which is a standing body that also is hosted by the Arundel Development Corporation of the county. And Arundel sits on that. And we met with them last month, tried to engage them, give their thoughts on this process. They gave us initial ideas. They'll come back with to us with some more, but a couple that came out of that conversation were things like establishing a food hub and kind of a processing and sales center where farmers can consolidate, bring their goods together, have cold storage, have places for value added producing within the county. And that could be located in Region 9 or elsewhere in South County. Could be public or private. There's the idea of trying to help promote that as an important piece of the kind of infrastructure to support the agricultural economy. And then, you know, another thing that kind of we've heard about from these conversations is, as I mentioned, there's a handful of organizations that are already established supporting ag. There's a lot of, and then there's the ag preservation side. We talked about the environment meeting in our first meeting. I'm not sure how well those are all coordinated, and that could be something that I think there's always room to improve on that. And that could be something that we add recreation into this plan to say that, you know, we kind of need a coordinated agricultural strategy to make sure that these organizations are leveraging and adapting to the changing agricultural landscape. Again, we'll hear more from, I think, the agricultural commission through this process, but I want to see if anybody had anything else they wanted to kind of add on this piece. I also mentioned agritourism too, that, again, there's the Crossroads Heritage Area, and Visit Annapolis, both have, efforts promoting tourism and agriculture and agritourism in this area.
I have a question. The expanded use of these farms as party places and wineries and breweries and those kinds of things. I haven't heard from any farm owners about whether this is desirable or not. And I'm imagining farm owners were supporting this, but I've also run into some farm owners who are not supportive of anything that takes their land out of production. So maybe that's something, you know, Gerardo or somebody else can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, overwhelmingly, more and more farmers want to do agritourism because it diversifies the income. Because what happened with COVID is those who were hit the hardest were the small scale farmers. And on average, most of the farms in Anne Arundel County are 50 acres or less, with almost all of the minorities owning less than 20 acres, like myself. Agritourism is how you make agriculture viable in an area where we're surrounded by metropolitan areas. The large scale grain farmers of them, they're probably the ones that are against it, but they lost their grain facility this year. So now while there was an interim solution for that, it still wasn't 100% solution. And as we've seen throughout the country, every farmer does not have a succession plan. We lose, I think, 10,000 farms a year nationwide. And in Maryland, the average age of a farmer is in excess of the average age of a farmer in the United States. So if you're going to make agriculture attractive in an area where we have a significant amount of young people, as well as creating that talent pipeline like my farm has, agritourism is the only way that will survive. Otherwise, honestly, if I can't operate with agritourism, we'll sell to them because that makes more sense. And that's where land prices are going. So agritourism makes you so much more viable, profitability wise, but it also gives access to those that don't have access to agriculture. And Anne Arundel County is like that one little shining star in the state that people can actually come and see actual farming happening, not just little social experiments around the state, where agritourism is actually thriving. So,
So trying to move away from the single use farm as a
yeah, and you see that with 98% of farmers have a second job, right? 2% of them are full-time farmers. I happen to be one of that 2%, but there's pushes all over the state, and Audrey can say it, the dual use of farmland is starting to become a necessary evil in order to make farms viable. So,
How about solar?
don't open that can of worms.
I think that sounds like a good time for the hard stop. So these are great conversations we're having. Do not forget this. Well, in March, we're gonna come back and have this topic of discussion. So if we want to talk about solar and ag together, bring it back then, right? There's nothing we can't talk about on March. So with that being said, Kate, if you want to do the pizza thing?
Yeah, we have a 10-minute break. There's sausage, pepperoni, mushroom, cheese, and Anthony for you. There's
Yeah.
Hawaiian pizza. So get yourself a piece or two, and then whatever's left, we invite our guests to help themselves. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna reconvene. So if you haven't gotten pizza or you need to, as the rest of the meeting goes on, feel free to help finish that off, because I'm on a diet.
seafood diet?
Seafood and eat it, yes, that's been the last month and a half. Okay, so. Thank you very much.
Okay, now that we're all set, we can move on to our next big topic. Next focus is going to be on housing tonight. I talk about, you shared a lot of statistics in your briefing paper. And so hopefully you had a chance to look over that. We're not going to go in depth on numbers tonight. We're going to kind of focus more on place-based discussions. I want to frame this conversation a little bit first by talking a little bit about trends, what we're seeing in the region for housing. Then we'll talk about missing middle. It's a housing type that's been referenced a few times in our meetings, but thinking about more diverse housing options. And then we'll talk specifically about affordability. And I'm going to be joined by Spencer Shanholz, who is one of our lead researchers in office planning and zoning. He's a real data guru, come up and talk about missing middle. He's done a lot of research across the country on what different municipalities are doing with this. And we'll have Aaron Karpowitz from the county's, from Arundel Community Development Services, which is a nonprofit branch of the county that is instrumental in supporting housing affordability and choice in the county. Important framing thing for housing in this region. One of the first things we said as this group, something that we continually repeat, is that we are not anticipating and not trying to have a lot more. We talked about the peninsula policy designation, that's in the general development plan. There are other measures over time, like we talked about the critical area provisions, so there's 1,000 feet from mean high water that add additional restrictions. That covers half of this region. We've got our sewer service area is limited in this area, and that also puts a limitation on the amount of development that can occur. So we have different layers of policies and regulations in the county to limit growth in this area. So as we're talking about housing, please keep the scale in mind. This graph shows the number of residential units that have been permitted in Region 9 since 2000. And you can see we were up above the 400s at the beginning of the 2000s. Great Recession hit, it dropped way down, and since then we've been at below 100 units per year in this region. As the county does its forecasting, as we're anticipating future growth in population and how that's been in employment, how to respond to that with housing, we're anticipating potentially another 300 or so units by 2040 across this whole region. So again, we're not talking about a lot of housing. I think the important thing for you guys to be thinking about your conversations are what kinds of housing do you want to see for those few units that do come into the area, and where you want to see focus, and then we can help creatively think about how we can improve our county policies and programs to support that idea, the types of housing and location that we want to try to. But a few fundamentals on housing. Almost all the housing that we see in the county is built by the private sector. We do have some programs, ACDS here tonight, and Anne Arundel County Housing Commission. There is some housing in the county that is publicly funded and managed, but the vast majority is private. And so think about the fundamentals of the private housing industry. This graphic borrowed from Howard County, that mentioned earlier, they've done a really nice job in housing plan. It takes these fundamental things like you got to build property owners. This is not coerced, this is, as I mentioned, market driven and market demand. We know there's a huge amount of market demand for housing in this area. Now you can see kind of pushing this pressure of prices up, that even though we're always astounded that new things get built and get the price of what they are, always somebody coming in to move in there. So those private developers they're doing that research on that market demand, they're seeing it and building for it. The government has this central role. We kind of set the rules, right? We have our zoning code, we have our development regulations. We set the parameters that folks can build within. But that's, as you've seen with, discussed already, some things that Virginia does not want to see built. The government gets hand tied by we only have so much consent authority. Our private property rights, enshrined in the Constitution, and in state and county laws that provide rights to we can constrain those rights within. And of course, with the private developers, they're the ones taking the risk, coordinating the acquisition of land, going through the design and permitting process, managing the construction and the marketing and sales. And of course, and there's the important piece of the lending industry. This often is overlooked, but quite often, these projects are always going to be financed. Like people putting in equity or taking out loans, and those folks always need to be satisfied. I think this often has been one of the drivers that we talk about, we all complain about cookie cutter development. Why does everything look the same? You're gonna go ask them for $10 million. They're gonna want to know that you've got a proven product that you're selling. And that low tolerance of risk from the lending community is a big driver for product similarity that they want to see in markets. Zooming in on that box for the county regulations. a whole complex of codes and regulations have evolved over time around development in general and housing specifically. The foundational ones are zoning code, which is Article 18 in the county code, and our subdivision and development regulation, which are Article 17. And the important thing about the zoning, I'll share this group with that. There's two pieces of it. There's the code language, that's the text of the county code, and then there's the map. So we often hear the term planning with that around a text amendment. That's when the county council goes in and they change the text of the county code. And all of a sudden, something in a zoning district is now changed what we allowed to happen there. We can make recommendations around that. We talked about the zoning code around residences and commercial fishing uses. We can recommend changes. Ultimately, that would be the county council that would adopt any changes to that code. Similarly, this group will look very intensively in a couple months at the zoning map. Look at the different districts that we have, look at early looks at that later on tonight, we do a group exercise. The different zones, categories between residential, commercial, industrial, and time zones that we have in the county. And we just received in the fall applications from property owners that may be asking for a change in their zoning district. This group will get a say to make your recommendations relative to those applications. So we're going to dive deep on those zoning maps in later meetings. The key things that are in every jurisdiction zoning code are these uses, as mentioned earlier, this idea of permitted, conditional, and special exception. Permitted uses are uses you're allowed to operate. If it's a residential zone property, you can have a single family house on it, and that's allowed. If it's a conditional use, like maybe a townhouse is conditional in your residential zone, there's gonna be a list of provisions in the code that you have to make sure you've met those. So it goes under increased scrutiny. Those are both still approved by the county administrative and the office of planning and zoning. There's also special exception uses. And those actually go through the administrative hearings officer. So another independent person to have a quasi judicial hearing. So some of our developments are planned unit developments, South River Colonies, planned development that gets approved by the administrative hearings officer. Basic things that are in zoning codes are density, say how many units of housing can be built per acre, how large of a commercial industrial operation can be built for the size, and the minimum size of the lot. And that kind of drives, again, the number of houses you're gonna see on an area of land. There's provisions around scale, the height, the distance that a building needs to be set back from the property boundaries, and then off-street parking requirements are also these. In the subdivision and development requirements, it gets to be more detailed. That lays out what the process is, the steps you have to undergo when you're applying for a development permit or subdivision permit. But also have provisions around adequate public facilities. So these are where we talk about the traffic study for a property. Or we're looking at, as we talk about the school capacity issue. When a project has to come in, they go through these various tests for transportation, school, stormwater. Is there sufficient water, sewer capacity for those projects? That's also where in the county code, the natural features protections come in that say that you can't, that you have to protect a stream if there's a buffer around it, or a wetland, 25 buffer around it. We talked about those in our first environment meeting. And our historic resource provisions are in there as well. So the process that the development goes through is these are the main steps. And there's two parallel processes. If you have to subdivide the property, so you got a big property, you're going to cut up smaller lots for housing, or if you already have an existing lot and you're going to build an apartment building or a commercial building on it. So the processes are parallel. They both need to go through the development regulations. Of course, the subdivision requirements apply for subdividing the land. The big steps are they come with a sketch plan. You know, the sketch plan shows the general roads, the lots, where the stormwater is going to go, where the utilities are going to lie on the property. There's requirements for public community meetings. You have to have a community meeting before you submit your sketch plan, and then at the final plan stage. After it goes through those processes, which can take years, as mentioned, for some of these complex controversial projects, they then have to go through and get the grading permit, which in this county actually has its own complex requirements because you've seen so many places with erosion issues with construction sites. So they've ramped up the requirements at the state and trickle down to the county level. And then your building permit. There's a whole separate code of all your building requirements, but all the requirements around access and emergency, say fire suppression systems, all your life safety systems. So it can be a lengthy process. There are multiple county agencies involved in review, Office of Planning and Zoning, of course, is a key role, our inspections and permits handles a little more detailed grading permit and building permit. Of course, the fire department, has their say, looking at those life safety issues, recreation parks, Office of Transportation, Public Works. They all have their view for their specific areas of expertise relative to all the regulations. So it's a coordinated review process. An interesting note on this, as we talk about affordable housing later on, is that affordable housing still is a housing development. It goes through the same process. There are some exceptions to the code that provide some more flexibility, especially around things like school provisions have changed recently around that. But an important overlay for them is that they're also typically for affordable housing projects trying to get state or federal dollars. And those have a timeline as well. So you run into this tension of, I applied to get state funding for this project, well, make it affordable. And if I can't get my development permit in time, that money would need to go back. So they're kind of racing against time on the financing. And Aaron Harper will speak more about that. So a little kind of permitting 101 for context. Now, to dive more specifically into how to Spencer, and we'll talk about missing middle housing.
All right, thank you all. Like Mike said, my name is Spencer Shanolds. I work on the long-range planning team with Eric, Jesse, and Mike, and zoning, and I do a lot of data, countywide things, some assistance, and I have a background in housing as well. So just the first, what I want to talk about is missing middle housing, which has been mentioned already, and a lot of you probably heard it. It's kind of a buzzword in the planning world over the past 10 years. But I'm going to talk about what it really means. And to talk about terminology first, I want to distinguish missing middle from affordable housing. When we talk about the term affordable housing, typically we think of subsidized housing. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But there's housing that's affordable and there's affordable housing. So I just wanted to say, kind of distinguish that missing middle housing is not necessarily, affordable. It doesn't have to be, but it provides a diversity of housing types that can provide a more affordable price points. So here, missing middle can include accessory dwelling units, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage courtyards, and so on. But it doesn't necessarily talk about such a good affordability level. So I'm going to run through a few of these. This is kind of the classic diagram that's kind of shown when you think of missing middle housing. Just to give you an overview. Typically, the market and our zoning regulations have pushed more towards the single detached family homes and then, larger apartment complexes. Historically, there's been a range in between there. But as we've developed, as I said, market preferences, zoning codes have kind of pushed those out. Whereas these used to be allowed, many are not in our current zoning code. As you can see, here's an example. On the left, you can see, typical single-family home neighborhood. On the right, you can see how some of these missing middle types can infill into that neighborhood and really not change a lot of the structure of or form of the neighborhood as much, but still provide some additional housing units at different price points for different types of people. We were talking earlier about workforce housing. A key thing to think about with this is, you can provide a smaller, 1 or 2 unit home that at a price point for your children or for seniors to stay in the community instead of moving out. And this is kind of a good way to add diversity into the housing types. So I'm going to go through just a few examples quickly. I think you were provided with a visual vocabulary in your pre-reading, and that gets really extended into that. But just a few of the types here. This is kind of a cottage courtyard, which shows, on a single lot, we can have multiple small units. You can think of them as, if you're familiar with an accessory dwelling unit, this is kind of a lot with a bunch of accessory dwelling units on it, I guess you could say. On the left here, this is a good example in the counties in Galesville, which is actually a property owned by HCBS, and she might mention that. But you know, it's one of the few examples of this in the county. Some other examples, you can have duplexes or fourplexes. Really kind of the example here is you can see this on the right. The duplex from the outside looks like a single family home. But just because, it has the same form, but it has, 2 units inside. Whereas on the right, you can see this is a fourplex, I think, up in North County, showing a different aspect. So moving on a little bit, multiplexes, so this is kind of the same thing, you can consider, these are sometimes called mansion houses, mansion apartments. But, just multiple units inside of a building that has the same outside form of a large home. So accessory dwelling units, recent regulation or code passed in the county, ordinance passed in the county in the past last year, allow standalone accessory dwelling units before it was not allowed in the county. So that was a push forward. Previously, was only allowed inside a home. If you're not familiar with an accessory dwelling unit, it's an additional unit that's part of a home that has a separate outside entrance. So really kind of to pull this all together, some considerations. Missing middle can help increase the diversity of housing, but not necessarily may not meet that affordable housing definition, which we'll talk about. Aaron will elaborate more on that soon. But it does provide a greater diversity of homes for different people looking for different things, and naturally can become a little more affordable. The supply is likely to be very small as the market adjusts, as regulations loosen up and it's allowed more in the county, or in other areas, it doesn't blow up and show. It's kind of a sprinkling, in the area, providing a couple units here and there, which can help provide some relief, especially in South County, which I think could help out a lot. But really it comes down to a lot of code challenges. We have, as Mike mentioned, we have a lot of density provisions in the county around our zoning code. So, just because a home has 2 doors makes it 2 units, and therefore there's a lot of restrictions when it comes to, you can only have so many units per acre. Parking requirements are another issue that needs to be discussed and talked about at a countywide level. It's very difficult for someone to add another unit and have to provide more parking, financially to make it feasible. But then you have to balance that also with increased traffic potentially, or increased need for parking in the neighborhood. And the last is just kind of lot dimension standards with and setback requirements for different zoning. A lot of our zoning codes are very restrictive on size, and having the dimensions, the needed dimensions to build buildings. I think that's all I've got. I'm gonna just show this one more time. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I have a question, because most of our area, as you mentioned, falls into those floodplain or the bay protection areas. And you talk about additional parking, which is a big thing. And I know I personally have a lot of trouble with the county trying to get a 2-car driveway in our yard. They want us to plant 40 trees like Paul said. So I'm curious how that would work out with that, if there would be some provision that you guys would bypass.
That's not like a critical area.
Yeah.
And so the where, this would be appropriate to county is a big federal policy question. This is really good for this group to discuss. We're gonna break it in small groups later on and kind of sit down with maps, and that'll be a question happy to. As you think about these types of housing, does it make sense in this area? If so, where? And maybe not in a critical area because of the heightened environmental sensitivity. Or maybe just one or two types, maybe duplex is okay, but nothing more than that. So those would be things that would be great for this group to discuss, and certainly we're debating internally of, where the county is appropriate to do. I think it's noteworthy that we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions around the country adopt, provisions to support missing middle housing, but it's typically at the city, municipal, incorporated city level, not at the county level. So thinking about, one incorporated place we have is, Annapolis, and Beach also incorporated, pretty small. But so thinking about where it's appropriate in county, is going to be a foundational question.
So I have a question. The county council turned down a proposed bill that would make affordable housing and missing middle easier.
It was not missing middle, but it's having a requirement that a percentage of the units built by a developer the affordability threshold. So it's kind of that Venn diagram. It's a different thing than missing middle, but, and that was actually a comment that was brought up by one of the council members who proposed legislation was, hey, if you had missing middle provisions, it'd be more feasible to meet that affordability requirement because you could have these different types of units already allowed. And without this, she considered that to be not right.
So, to be the devil's advocate on that point, so if we were to hypothetically recommend that there were certain areas that we increase the development for to meet these middle housing requirements that aren't currently there, because then it's at the developer's discretion, then could they would probably, if I was a developer, I'd be developing for the highest dollar that I could. So I don't think that we necessarily just be allowing the devil into the playground, not necessarily like doing what I thought you're going to be doing, which was provide affordable housing, if there's just be more people in more tiny expensive houses.
Yeah, I think, but on the other side of that, a lot of people that are, if you were to purchase a lot, or if someone wanted to, if we don't do that, then they're more likely to build a large, mansion home, which you see a lot in a lot of other counties, so I don't do.
Yeah, the Montgomery County did a financial study of that, looking at what would the price point of these things coming to be, and their comparison was whether to check out, houses being knocked down and mansions being built, so you're seeing down here on the waterfront. They're saying, yeah, it gives an option for that property owner to still make $1, but build 2 units that they're not as affordable as you want them to be, but they're not $1 million plus mansions. So it's kind of, not the panacea to answer all things, but another tool in the toolbox helps to, provide diversity. Montgomery County hasn't passed this yet, but they've been studying it.
So as an example, to just build this out a little bit, several people went to the county with the idea for a pocket community at Yalesville on an existing piece of land. Excuse me, where they could build 12,000-foot units on basically 2.5 acres with a common courtyard that would price out, say, $250,000, 250, some 300,000. And the county was receptive to it as a pilot, but the land got sold before that could happen. And I haven't seen any plans, but essentially it's a piece of land where you'll build $2 million houses, as opposed to 10 or 12 that would be affordable and attractive to new people, to teachers, to older folks who want to sell their big houses and stay in the community. But if we can think about opportunities like that as part of our process, where can we look for positioning for pilot projects, for alternatives? It's around if we think about it creatively.
And the hope is the demand for land here is much lower than it is in Galesville or even further north.
Just for more clarity around missing middle housing, are there or will there be regulations around developers, for instance, buying the smaller units and then expanding them? How is that going to be managed?
Yeah, I think that's the detail that needs to be worked out in legislation.
So that happen?
Well, once they're labeled as affordable, isn't there a time period
So we're talking about.
Yes,
It's not affordable, missing middle housing.
Well, no, I'm talking about the affordable one stop. So, yeah, I understand about missing middle, but we talk about the affordable, isn't there a?
Yeah, let's,
Can that also be applied
Yeah.
to some of the missing middle?
let's let Aaron kind of go, get that conversation, and then come back to that.
Yeah, no, sorry, I want to be part of this conversation too. I think you all have really great questions. And so if you don't mind, I'm gonna just quickly go through my slides. I think they're pretty elementary. And you all sound like you know what you're talking about already. So I want to get into the conversation about missing middle, the moderately priced dwelling unit policy that you mentioned, and kind of how they intersect and how they all come together. So, just real quick, I'm Erin Karpowitz. I'm with the Arundel Community Development Services. We are the county's nonprofit housing and community development agency. We're a little bit unique in that we operate much like other county, housing and community development departments throughout the state and the country, but we were privatized about 30 years ago. So that enables us to actually act a little bit nimble and, not, we don't just produce policies and programs, we also can go out and act as a developer. So I want to talk about some of those, like the pocket community that you were talking about, and talk a little bit about some of the things we do. But just real quick, I guess I didn't get switched. What is affordable housing? And Spencer, showed kind of missing middle and affordable. They're not always the same. I guess I would say affordable housing, everybody needs affordable housing, right? It doesn't matter what income level you're at. My agency is more focused on people who are at 100% of the area median income and below. So obviously, those people need more help finding affordable housing. There's less supply on the market for those people at that lower end. So we talk about affordable units that are rental units. Those are oftentimes subsidized. We provide loans for those units, and private developers develop them, but then we bring our financing in. Also, sometimes we act as a developer. We'll do small scattered site developments. Spencer mentioned, and he mentioned the 10 House Creek Village in Galesville. That was one of our properties that we rehabilitated, small cottages, very cute. And that's affordable rental units for workers in the area. It used to be oyster shelters community. So that's great. We were able to preserve that as affordable housing and spruce it up and make it nice. We just did a big capital improvement program there in the last few years because we've owned it for so long that we've already tried to create investment. But there's public housing. When people think about affordable housing, they think of public housing, rundown towers. Today's public housing, it's much nicer than that. But also there are privately owned units that are restricted and are affordable. So I just want to put it out there that there are all different types, and there's home ownership. We're especially concerned with people who are earning 100% of AMI and below, because those people can't find any housing to buy. It's very, very difficult the way prices have surged. So this slide just kind of talks about, what the affordable housing crisis is. 45% of all renters in the county, regardless of their income, are cost burners. Our rental prices have risen over the last 3 years in a big survey that we did. It went up from like $1,500 a month over $1,900 a month. And that's over a three-year period. That's crazy. That means people, moderate income households, they can't afford groceries. Groceries are going up too. They can't afford medical costs because they gotta pay rent, or they can't pay rent because they gotta buy food for their kids. So it's a crisis, not just at the very low income level that you might think agencies like us are working with. It's everybody, it's your neighbors. On the homeownership side, from 2017 to 2022, the median home price has risen by 35%, while income's only risen 17%. And we know interest rates are going up a lot, so it's really, really hard for people to afford those high-priced houses. It's even harder than it was last year. So what does my agency again provide loans? So we can come in and bring a major loan in to another government program. The state of Maryland has the low-income housing tax credit program that it administers. And so we'll bring in some financing, and then those units have to be restricted to people earning 60% of area median income and below.
And so that's for, and just as an example, in our county, for family of three, that's about $65,000 a year. So that's our service workers, our teacher aides, our hospital aides, construction workers, all kinds of essential folks that we need in every community in the county. And this, I'm not gonna go into the details, but this just kind of gives you why the public entity is necessary to make those units be restricted rents. And then I just want to show, sometimes when we talk to communities about affordable rental units, they think, oh, it's gonna be like this big public high rise coming into our R5 zoned area. It doesn't have to be that way. This is an example of a property that we funded, back in, gosh, what year? I don't remember what year that was. It's been around for at least 6 or 7 years. Oakwood Family Homes, it's in the Glen Burnie area, 22 single-family detached units that are going to be, that they're rented to people making 60% AMI below. And then they have the opportunity to purchase them in a lease-to-own arrangement eventually. But these are beautiful units, very nicely done, and it's only 22 units. Those rental units are essential in our county. This is another example, Marley Meadows. This is for seniors, we know, older adults, as they downsize, they don't have anywhere to go. Like where they may have bought their house 30 years ago, they want to downsize, but they're on a fixed income and they can't afford to purchase a smaller home. So affordable rental units and homeownership units are really important. But again, like I said, not just concerned about people at the 60% AMI and at the rental, who have rental needs. We're also concerned about homeowners. And I need to fix this slide before we put it in the permanent archives. This needs to be updated. But we run a homeownership program. If you have family or friends or neighbors that are interested in buying a home, we have a program that provides free homeownership. But those folks can't go out and buy homes because there aren't any that they can afford. It's free, and actually, it doesn't matter what your income is. If you're making $200,000 a year, we'll provide the free homeownership education because we think it's important for everybody to be informed. But then what we have on the backside of it is a down payment closing cost assistance program. We provide now up to $50,000 in zero interest loan funds to help you for your down payment closing costs. No payments. But you have to be earning 100% of their immediate income, and that's the part that I need to fix on the slide. I'm sorry about that. So you think, wow, that's great, $50,000. Well, all fiscal year, our fiscal year starts July 1, we've only had 7 people take advantage of that, 7 households. And we have had 400 active people in our home buyer class. Why is that? They can't, go ahead, ma'am.
Well, there's no homes for them to buy, and that price point, it's very difficult when you make that amount of money and then you look at what you can afford, and the lower end homes can sometimes need a lot of work that would just not make sense for them.
That's right, that's exactly right. And sure, there are some, there are credit issues and, ability to obtain a mortgage for some people that can't, it's very difficult. We work with them one-on-one to overcome those barriers, and that's the main reason, the supply. We don't have supply. So, when we talk about, missing middle and just affordable housing in general, I think, one, yes, it's great. We have an affordable housing trust fund now, which is awesome. We can use that money to expand our development activities, but we still need land that's zoned appropriately so that you can build those. And again, it doesn't have to be, a 200 apartment unit development. It could be a 22 unit rental development. And honestly, that's what's getting funded with Maryland DHCD right now. But we need to at least, have some zoning that allows for that, to create those units. And then the other piece is on missing middle, I want that missing middle to happen, even if, like you pointed out, those units are not priced affordably. It's gonna help add to the supply. But I do think that that's why also we need the moderately priced dwelling unit or something like the essential housing worker. So anyway, that's it. Well, actually, this is just 1 second. Let me go back. This slide just kind of talks about a lot of the things that we are already doing. The Pittman administration and current county council have helped us, get these tools in our toolbox. There are a lot of tools in our toolbox, but a couple still remain unchecked. One is inclusionary zoning. That's the moderately priced dwelling unit. We need that. And that's just creating, 10 or 15% of all development that's being built. That would be creating units that have to be affordable. But when you're looking at a district like this, and there are only 300 units being built every, is that what you said, Michael? 300, 10% of that is 30. Well, yeah, that helps. I'm glad about that. But there has to be something more to create more supply. So.
Have you guys looked at instead creating, using some of the tax dollars to create a program so that like if you were to buy a house that needed the work to be able to move in, that like, because when you do I forget what the loan is, where you take it out.
Yeah.
You get the money for
That's
renovation.
Yeah.
That you could offset that, because I feel like that would be a more feasible plan to get people into those homes, because like there are still a lot of cottages and stuff that come up for sale in this area, and that would be like a more feasible option, I feel like, in this area to like introduce home ownership at like an equitable way, would be to have this source of additional low interest or no interest funding that could be provided.
Yeah, and we have looked at that, and in fact, the scattered site rental program that we have now started us doing, it was an acquisition rehab program that was meant to turn into a homeowner. We would sell it to income eligible homeowners, and that we started that way back a long time ago when the housing market came in 2006, 2007. And so we turned it into a rental program, but we are ready to start looking into that and doing that again. And we have been looking, but again, the total development costs, usually where we can find those units to acquire that are affordable, plus all the work that you have to put into it, it's in Brooklyn Park. It's maybe in Arundel. I haven't seen any down here, but so that's good to know that you've seen those. We'll keep looking out, and if you see some,
I guess like what's affordable, like what I think is affordable for this area.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's a great idea and something that we're looking into. So this gentleman on the left of that, and then that.
Just a quick question, how big is the housing trust?
So it's expected to generate about 7.5 to 10 million a year. It was seeded last year at 10 million with some general funds, and then this year we're getting the revenue. They projected for this year that it's drawing from the transfer tax, a percentage of the transfer tax on home sales over $1 million, and so they were predicting that those sales would be a little bit down this year, and they are, but so they projected only bringing in 7.5% or 7.5 million this fiscal year. And so far, the last time I checked with our budget office, the revenue projections were on track. So we're on track. A big percentage of that funding is being held to help fund some of these developments, the larger developments, which are really, really expensive. I think we're talking $30 million, and we bring in the critical gap. I'm really excited. I should have introduced Gabrielle Linder is in the back. She's on my team. And Beth Rush is still here. She's my planning director. I'm really excited because with the trust fund dollars plus some federal home dollars that we've had available, we've been able to close on the financing for 6 deals this fiscal year. So far, we're only halfway through. I'm sorry, close on 5, with 1 more to go. And that's amazing. We used to only do one of these every 2 years, but none of them are south of Annapolis. So, I'm encouraged because we have a few projects that have come in to ask for our support to bring in gap funding, and they're applying to Maryland DHCD. None of those are in South County, but they're smaller projects, and one of them is in an area in the county that hasn't had any affordable housing. As long as I've been here, I've been working for 20 years.
Thank you.
So this is a question from ignorance, but the two bills that didn't pass, 7823, 8623. When it comes to this affordable housing, middle housing questions. Has the county looked at doing redevelopment? Because I'm sure all of us can think of 4 or 5 spots in different areas throughout zone 9. Region 9, that could be redeveloped to fulfill some of these needs. And, you know, were these 2 bills that are gonna be resubmitted, would they be addressing some of those fixes in that manner?
Yeah, and I'll let my colleagues at planning and zoning speak more to the redevelopment bill. I wasn't highly involved in that. But yeah, the redevelopment bill was, you know, looked at a lot of, you know, creating, policies and development regulations that would allow and facilitate redevelopment, but I think would have had a positive impact on being able to create some affordable housing opportunities. But I'll let you, I don't know.
Yeah, the redevelopment bill was targeted just at that, because county council and planning and zoning had talked for years with developers about what is the challenge with, say, like, build giant type of sites.
Yeah.
And kind of identify those issues and craft a bill around that, which became redevelopment. It's just
Is this just large sites or so when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about just places like over here, right, where the old Kmart is. But I'm thinking of, there's places where it's a cottage that can be scrapped and something dropped in, you know, without too much issue. So is it addressing those as well?
it was targeted around,
Commercial.
yeah,
Single.
it was focused on, actually, what we did, the targeted growth areas in plan 2040, so thinking about like your commercial corridors,
Yeah.
town centers and around transit. So those kind of areas that we often hear from the community, as we discussed in previous days, wow, that'd be nice to redevelop those sites. It wasn't geared towards kind of countywide, just some of those smaller focused areas.
Yeah, I just to Kate's, point about the, you know, kind of the cluster, what did you call it, a village, cottage. Pocket cottage. You know, those are things that, you know, we're trying to do as a developer, a public purpose developer, to create demonstrations like that. We have a community in Glen Burnie. We were able to get some surplus land from the county, and it was donated to us, and the development costs are huge because it didn't have water, sewer, so we had to, we're having to purchase the property next door and run public water, sewer there. But we're gonna do, you know, duplexes, and because we can create a little bit more density, not much, and create those units, and we're gonna sell them to households at about 100% of AMI or below. But I think we need to do more of those kinds of smaller developments, smaller communities, smaller homes. You know, we can't do, you know, a McMansion or, you know, 1 unit per acre everywhere. We're gonna have a place for our parents to retire or our kids to live if they're teaching at the school down the street. And so I think, you know, there's also a way in looking to, again, examples. If you're looking at like a moderately priced value program like Montgomery County, they have ways, and they addressed it in their regulations, where they can create a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex on a lot in, say, a one acre per 1 unit per acre development that looks on the outside like that unit. And, you know, but yet it's, you know, has space, smaller space, for people who, need that smaller space because of the affordability. And also, frankly, you know, I think development trends, demographics are trending that people don't want larger homes anyway, because of upkeep and the utility costs and things like that, and the family sizes are shrinking.
I have a question about the moderately priced dwelling units that the developers have to do with the 10%. And then around that program, there's such a narrow window for somebody that fits that like doesn't make too much money, but has enough money to qualify for a loan so that they're in a secure financial position and they're not, you know, like overextending themselves. those always are on the market longer. I'm a real estate agent, but they're on the market longer. They're harder to find people for. Has there been thoughts of maybe relaxing that just a little bit so that it might be able to help like more people?
Yeah, so in the original bill, and I'll be honest, it got amended so many times, I don't remember when it ended up in the final bill that did not pass. But yes, I think that's a good point. One thing that we have in the bill is that, so the moderately priced dwelling unit bill or central worker housing bill, it was supposed to serve households on, let's take homeownership, it was supposed to serve homeownership families earning 100% of area median income. So their income couldn't exceed, say, 105,000 per family of three. However, the legislation stipulated that we had to set the price at 80%. So that it was affordable, so that a family earning 80% of area median income would only have to spend 30% of their income on that house. So the house price was set at is affordable to families 80%, but we could take families, and maybe you get somebody who's making 70%, they've got really good credit, they've got really good savings, and low debt. And
Right,
so
so maybe if they.
yeah, so maybe that family could, and then, so we're serving then people from 70% all the way up to 100%. But then the other thing we had in there was kind of a rescue valve, and that if there weren't enough buyers, then what we could do is we could extend the income limits for teachers and county employees or a special population. I think that there was some, pushback on that, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. What makes them essential? Well, I think it was more of a public purpose type thing where, county needs to recruit teachers. We need to recruit and retain good teachers and good county employees. But you could put some kind of a thing like that, where if the waiting list didn't have enough eligible households, then you could go up another band in income. That would be a feasible thing.
Are there any programs or thoughts of underwriting loans, like basically like funding loans through the county? Because the underwriting guidelines are definitely getting tighter, and you're working with a population that may have a couple jobs or may not have the work history, or they may be getting kicked out and they just don't qualify for the loan. I think those are some of the challenges. Like, they're good programs, but there's a lot of caveats that make it not for everyone.
We work a lot with the Maryland Mortgage Program, and which, I don't know if that relieves some of those issues, but it's not something we've looked at about being our own mortgage lender, being a public mortgage lender. But one thing we do as part of our mortgage assistance program, down payment, closing cost assistance, and also interest rate buy down. So some of that money can be applied to that. But no, that's something we can put on our list to look at. Yes, sir.
I've seen success out west particularly, but instead of just incentivizing the owner of the renter, there's programs specifically within agriculture right now, but it could probably be addressed with the maritime industry as well, where they will offer these same types of programs, but to the farmer or to the business owner, so that they have affordable housing for their laborers, which then addresses the issue of a labor shortage, as well as incentivizing somebody who has a credit history to build something like an accessory unit. So it's like, it falls within the realm of what this is all trying to incentivize, but it's also addressing the labor shortage.
Yeah.
I know, I haven't heard of any of that taking place in Maryland yet, but I know that those programs are still afforded to Maryland, but almost no counties have even told any farmers that they can build farmer assisted housing.
Interesting.
Yeah, Street tried that.
Huh?
Ray Green Street Gardens for his seasonal farm employees. And he got the money from the feds and couldn't get it from the state and county, and ran out of time and lost out.
Yeah, and I think it, because particularly with farm labor, that's all seasonal, so like in the off season, there could be housing for teachers and stuff like that, but there's no stipulation in the federal guidelines for the incentives that you only can do farm labor. You could still rent to a teacher or the county employee.
Is that like through the Federal Home Loan Bank?
No, it's through the FSA, I believe, right now, which is the USDA's.
Okay, yeah,
program.
USDA.
But, DHCD has the program within their purview as well, but I think they received applications, but have approved with 0,
Okay.
because the counties are the ones stopping.
I'm not aware, like, no projects have come through my office, and I don't know if it's like a land use thing, because I would assume they would have to get some kind of land use to, get something changed, because most farmland is not zoned to allow for that, but we have financed, I'm just thinking of, everyone's familiar with Laurel Race Course, and there was a need for housing for their jockeys and for stable hands. And so we actually did finance, we partnered with the developer, this was actually before my time, so it was right before I got to the county. And they partnered with the developer, I forget which developer, but they created affordable units for that workforce. And I'm interested in that, if you have a project or hear of one, they can come talk to me, I'll talk to them about the financing, and then maybe, I think that this, administration is open to hearing about those types. But I think it's very critically important that this group say in your plans with your specific recommendations, we want to see those types of things. We want to see demonstration programs or some flexibility if there's a farmer or other property owner that wants to create that. And I'll just add one more thing. I did meet with a financing agency group that works, they have a nonprofit and they work a lot of times with school systems. They work with the school system in Texas, and there was surplus school land that they were able to get and create. So it's the same concept. So I'm very interested in that and seeing if we could make something.
I know a few projects around the state that are just running into county issues.
Okay, yeah, hopefully, you guys are gonna send around information, feel free to add my email to that. And I'd love to hear from you, and if anybody knows of any extra property floating around, that would make a good demonstration.
I have a question. It's not in our area, but it's adjacent to our, very close to our, trailer parks. Wastes Corner has an abundance of trailer parks. The approaches to Wastes Corner, 408 has a lot of trailer parks. There's a trailer park at Tracy, Lions Creek. The trailer park. That's private property, but those are highly densely developed parcels of land that are for affordable, lower income type. Now, I'm not saying put the trailer parks here, but what I'm saying is
Right.
this, our area, with the exception of a few places, may not be as adaptable for what we're talking about here as places very close to you. I mean, we have all that property up in Crownsville. Okay, they're building huge buildings that need to be redeveloped, and everybody's, coming up with stuff. But the only thing, we have here is converted farmland. And some of them have been converted into smaller farms, horse farms and such. Or they are 20-acre parcels, because that's about what you can break a farm down to. It's this area is a 20-acre parcel. So I think there's a big hurdle to jump to do a lot of this. I know all of the shucking houses used to have places for all the seasonal workers. And that was fortunately happened to have one right in Gales. And we were to take advantage of it. But, I don't see, other than, some monstrosity of a monstrous house in Davidsonville or Harwood or someplace that's 6,000 square feet or more, that's reaching a point in its assumed that's gonna have to be redone. Some of them are old and could be turned into a duplex or something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right, there's not a lot of developable land, and so redevelopment has to be part of the strategy, and I'm glad you brought up the trailer parks, the mobile home parks, because those are, you know, that weighs on me, because how are we that's one of the main sources of affordable housing down south, and if you rezone it, that makes it very vulnerable to, you know, market rate development, because they're privately owned. So how do we preserve that? And I don't have any.
Another experience that I have few rental properties, in different places. And there is also a trend nationally to buy up cheaper houses by investment companies nationally and re-rent them or tear them down and sell them as more expensive homes. How much of that is taking place in our area itself?
It's happening some, but when I was looking at like some of the data, and I guess it might not be for this year, our rental rates in Region 9 are very low compared to the rest of the county. And I think it's because the houses are more expensive. And so you can't really make the rate of return if you are gonna buy them and rent them like you can in a condo in Annapolis. So I think that's part of it. In our area, it just does not make sense to build a smaller home. There's no builders building a single family home or smaller home. It just financially makes no sense for them to do it. The economics don't work.
So on that note, I can jump in, with regarding, it doesn't make sense, right? Well, what if code could change? How could code change for things to make sense, to help the affordability aspect and provide more housing options for more types of people, right? And so, the one thing that recently failed, you know, the bills that failed, of being able to help provide the opportunity for missing middle through the different zoning designations could be a way to help provide the affordability for lots of different people that need it and really can benefit from it.
But you're running into a problem. We just heard 15 houses or 16 houses maybe going in May. Or, who wants to see 24 units at the end of Shady Side Road? Who wants to see another 24 units go into Mayo, which generates, how many cars does that generate on this?
And I think that one right there is a good point to tie back to what Kate said at the beginning of this whole night. Is think outside the silo, connect everything together, right? And I think personally, from a transportation background, missing middle, I think it's a fantastic idea, but you need the infrastructure to be able to do it. You know, because you're absolutely correct. You can't have 4 duplexes or townhomes or whatever, where a single family used to be, and expect the road to be able to maintain it, or you expect the same infrastructure to be able to withstand them. And I'm not saying we do all the roads, or I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying everything lives together. Everything is, the county planning and the code should be a living organism that needs to grow and adapt and be able to fit the needs of the communities and the people that live in it. So my question to the SAC is, what is your ideas to help make that achievable, if that's the vision you see for Region 9?
Some of this goes back to the APFs, right? Especially traffic. If the traffic APF, I've been actually part of the working group on that. And this was a question I asked them 2 months ago during our last meeting. So why is the APF not, I don't want to use the word punitive, but it is a forcing function, like all the APFs, right? You're using it in order to force desired outcomes. Why is it not punitive in nature when it fails, when they fail for a developer, you know, or any kind of development to bring it back up? Because right now, I think there's too many loopholes like, what is it, lead, or what was on that from? Pay and leave, and
Payment in lieu of taxes.
payment in lieu of taxes.
You're right, payment in lieu of.
Right, so there's too much. So things like that, like forcing the APFs to be used in more of a forcing function than they're currently being used in, I think would help alleviate some of this, I don't want to call it misuse. But when we see 16 homes going in, where I already know that the intersection at Mayo and Lock Haven is failing, right? And now I'm adding 10 trips per house, per foundation, per day, per 24-hour. So that's 160 new trips that's now burdened on that road. Plus you have the sewer issue, plus you have the well issue, plus, so we can, and then schools, so right now the schools are not an issue. For, I think middle school may, that I'm not, but I don't think so. So the elementary, middle, high school are all open right now. So I mean, it's those kinds of things, because in 2008, during the crash, Pete Smith, he and I used to have talks about this. The county was spending on infrastructure projects equivalent to the growth rate based on development. And then as soon as 2008 hit, the county started spending a whole lot less money on the infrastructure. While development, they tried to keep that development going because of the economic issues. The problem is they never brought the spending on infrastructure back up to meet. And so ever since 2008, the county has been not been able to keep up with infrastructure growth or with infrastructure demands based on developmental growth. So for me, I always like to focus, I try to focus more on redevelopment issues. So when we look at these missing middle or affordable housing and the trailers, right? So there's plenty of spots. I'm gonna take the peninsula pieces out of this because those are an exception due to the access issue. But there are plenty of places where you could drop a single family home that's like we saw earlier, or one or two or even three trailers on a parcel that's not being used, or to redevelop it, an old barn that could be taken down and put in for worker housing type of thing at farms and close to marinas and close to the schools for workers. So anyways, those are just some thoughts on getting the rule sets to work in the favor of what's really needed.
Let's do two questions, and then I've got a suggestion for the group.
Yeah. A quick, so the county has an adequate facilities section, which is or was set up to stymie circumstances like this years ago. So in answering your question, my neighbor sold his farm to a developer after many, many years of pressure. But under the adequate facilities portion of the county law, it could not be divided. So my take on that is, the developers have the resources and the connections and the loopholes that after 3 years, 15 mini mansions went up on that small farm, despite the fact that there was an adequate facilities section. The roads couldn't handle it, schools couldn't handle it, the water couldn't handle it. Yet after 3 years, the bulldozers were in building the mini mansions. So my answer to that is the laws and the zoning codes and the critical area nodes need to be enforced. These loopholes, despite the money being spent by the developers, need to be canceled out. And I know that's a huge problem. But there are laws on the books and codes on the books that can stop things like this, but it doesn't. So that's the dichotomy. What more laws, what more rules, what more codes can we suggest to the county, to the state, to the feds to do when we can enforce the ones that we have?
But there's one simple one,
Yeah.
and everybody knows what it is. And when you bring sewer anywhere, you instantly upzone property that you brought sewer to, instantly. And with that, you have all the problems that you're dealing with, whether it's an overcrowded intersection, a school, or whatever. So, and the county, we need to go back and look at the projected wish list for bringing public sewer here, there, and everywhere. And that needs to be revisited, and a lot of red ink needs to be drawn over a lot of that stuff moving forward. Because I said it the first day we got here, when we met, is that we can use, we can use the exercise in Mayo as where we don't want to go ever again in this county.
And by the way, we have 600 lots that are not yet built, that are totally buildable. So with no 48 homes in the middle of a forest and no 16 homes beside the American Legion, there are still 600 buildable lots that the county can't stop because the owners have the right to build.
So it's not going to be a projected 300 houses, it's already at 600.
But the owners have rights for their property, they have investments, so it's a hard problem to meet in the middle. So, but instead of building 16, maybe on that one lot, and I know the lot you're talking about, under the adequate facilities, I would have thought that they would have limited that to a much smaller number of units. But obviously, it keeps pushing forward.
Greed and dollars are always gonna, unfortunately, I feel like right now, and like to the cautionary note that we heard before.
Hold
Is
on.
that, I mean, there was caution to redevelop or rezone in a trailer park because we lose that, the affordable housing, because again, the dollar is going to.
Well, I said
down.
before, this whole area goes to the highest bid.
But I just worry, like, as we go out, like, out for our activities, like, if we look at splitting more property, I mean, most of the properties that we all live on have already been split multiple times, as seen by, like, I have a neighbor behind me, a neighbor to one side, a neighbor to another neighbor is because it's wet. But it's technically a lot. But, I mean, we've already seen so much subdividing, so I just caution as we look at this, because like technically, I'm pretty sure my lot can be divided once more and do a small housing project, or maybe 4 houses, but what are those, like, we all have the best intentions, but that's not what's really probably going to happen. And so, like, as we look at 2040, we have this idea of building small affordable homes, or small, somewhat affordable homes, or places where teachers are living, but in reality, what we ended up with is like a mini Bethesda in southern Indiana County. I mean, we've already seen that in Edgewater 10 years ago to Edgewater now, or Edgewater 20 years ago to Edgewater now. It used to be a small little plain field with a couple business parks, and now it's like mini Prague. So I'm sorry, I get very passionate about.
And it will get worse, because the problem is with the improvement of 214, once that traffic circle goes in at 214 in Lock Haven, what's going to happen is, so I'm a little curious how the 16 homes. Oh, I know how we did it. Because the traffic study never reached Lock Haven. That's why.
It'll get there.
Huh?
It'll get there.
No. So when they did the traffic study, they never had to go to Lock Haven. Lock Haven is a failed intersection. Which is one of the reasons why Glebe can't be built. But because it's so many intersections past Lock Haven, during the traffic study for those 16 homes, it never triggered that.
Like I said, it'll get to one or the other.
So as we're wrapping up this meeting, we do have quick things, Michael, so go ahead.
Yeah, I want to suggest that, one of the big things that this group has influence, and you guys are already talking around this. The important thing is kind of context. We can talk about things in general, but I'll come to the specific location. And later on in this process, you guys, as I said, we can look at zoning maps. And a lot of this ends up being the math of the zoning. They got so many units because that's the math, that size of the property multiplied by the units per acre they're allowed by that zoning. Do you like the opportunity to look at that and scrutinize and say, are these the appropriate zones? In the small area plan previously, there was a big chunk of the area around Deal that was down because of recommendations coming out of the advisory committee at that time. There might be more places like that for you guys to look at where you think that, hey, this is have too much capacity in the zoning code currently, you might recommend. That's always a tough fight, right? Because that's because that private property owner in their rights, if all of a sudden you devalue their property. So that's never an easy thing to do, but it's something this group can look at, and that's probably the biggest influence you can have on these questions that we're debating right now. The flip side of the coin is thinking about, on the positive side, where would you like to see this kind of housing go? And I think this, we had talked about doing kind of a breakout group exercise to give you guys maps to look at that. But judging how this conversation is going and where we discussed last time, I think the answer is pretty simple for you guys. There's only a handful of locations that you think is appropriate. We don't want to see more housing in the peninsulas, obviously, at the ends. But we have these couple of areas that we talked about last time. I'm going to mention Edgewater, but like, thinking about, we talked about Churchton, could there be more housing near that crossroads? But also recognizing that a lot of area around there is wet, so you're talking about probably a pretty small area. The potential, I think deals with the open question of, with this group, and it is not, I think it's not even a decision you guys are making or not an issue that you make a hard decision on. Because as you think, kind of as a principle, as you go forward, looking at zoning applications, zoning maps, where are the locations that you think would be appropriate to support more housing? I think we have a clear idea where we don't want it. But are there any locations in the region that you think would be appropriate to support a modest amount of housing? And would you be supportive of the idea of being supportive of like diversifying the housing stock, right? Because as it stands, almost all the zoning in this area is going to just support single family detached houses. And as you mentioned, the market's going to drive this to be the largest, most expensive houses that the market will bear. So are there any locations that come to mind that would be if we could push policy and craft things to direct housing in these certain areas, where would those handful of areas be?
If that's a question, one thing that comes to my mind would be if you thought about areas that were outside the critical area, obviously not wetlands.
Yeah.
Had sewer and water, I think would be my baseline thoughts.
And the infrastructure road wise.
And then road wise, but so I think not in the critical area, not in wetlands.
Yeah.
Not and has sewer and water. I think both are important, sewer and water. And you narrow that down, and I think you look in those areas, and I think there may be opportunity there.
I think you're down to a sliver of Edgewater.
Yeah.
As far as region line goes.
Wastewater facility only services pretty much areas in low-lying areas.
But I agree, I think.
Well, yeah, well, I think you gotta take that part out, and the peninsulas obviously aren't a good idea.
And there's no public water anywhere, except maybe Edgewater.
Yeah.
Lime Tree.
So that's right, because once you take it, because you're not gonna be able to, no developer right now is going to pay for water, sewer, power to be, roads to actually be physically moved in, unless you're talking several hundred homes. So, getting into this, we're looking at infill lots, and we're looking at any development under 3 or 4 houses to avoid it, because now you're getting into the subdivision, right?
And you mentioned before the redevelopment.
Sure, and that is the better, because now you already have you already have the infrastructure there. It's already in place. It's already past APS, the past. You're not gonna have a lot of the environmental impacts because it's already impacted and been there. Like like the Kmart, like the.
Yeah. Looking at like job use, I guess maybe where this like the Kmart, like something more like what is it, town park, but on like a smaller scale. And hopefully like more affordable.
Town center.
Town park.
Yeah. It's small.
Yeah, smaller scale.
And on a very small scale, there are a couple of underutilized businesses, on the shady side. Structures anyway, shady side. You know, it's an acre, but they're underutilized and a developer has an idea for townhouses or quads or something like that. I think those would be great.
Or even what is that one?
Some of them have already changed hands. I guess we'll hear what the plans are down the road.
That'd be
Or,
great.
you know, so-
What is that one property, the one where the River Keepers Association uses?
That's already changed hands.
Okay.
So,
Just everything.
Yeah, my point was only smaller scale than the redevelopment bill imagined.
right,
Yeah.
The redevelopment bill was bigger properties.
So one thing I'm gonna jump in, we've got an underlying theme, we talked about our very first topic of the environment, right? And these first 4 points, environmental protection keeps going on the pace of that. Something else we talked about a minute ago, we talked about the mixed use in scale is something that I think, and this is where I'm asking you if I'm hearing you correctly, the neighborhood design scale and keeping it compatible with the neighborhood is also seems to be very important with this group. Am I off base there? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think personally, that's why I really like the labor housing incentives. The reason it's so successful in Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma is because it keeps rural areas rural. So there's no neighborhood you're designing, you're just literally giving the farmer an additional revenue stream. Which they're not limited to just housing their own neighborhood. So, and it also doesn't incorporate like sewage and all that stuff, it just keeps it rural. So like, well, I mean, I really like the idea of like having like these huge centers with like, housing, like, in order to keep the like essence of what a rural community is. So, just make,
There's also-
houses.
There's also old abandoned homes that, you know, just sitting on property,
Yeah.
and they can be developed.
Like even
Aliens.
Under the current zoning code for commercial land, is a permitted use to turn that into a multi-family? I mean, would that be a possibility to say like, I have this commercial property?
It's a conditional use.
Okay, so they
And one of those conditions is that I think it's 25% of the floor area has to be commercial. So you couldn't just make it all a townhome, there could be a commercial element, so it could be
Mixed
something like,
use.
apartments over retail.
So like shady side, what is it, they have the car wash and then.
And then they have the
ice cream shop
apartments.
And the laundry and then the apartments above.
Yeah, but I think that would be,
And there are mixed use, zoning designations that have different regulations than just commercial. So you can
Yeah.
bring whatever.
but I don't feel like we have a lot of mixed use zoning, so I think, but we have commercial pockets that I feel like some of that commercial area is a little bit underutilized, and if the owner of that, it feels like very more level to say, oh, I have this commercial property now, or instead I could put, you know, like nothing too big, but to a certain extent, you could have a couple units in that area. The other question I had is, could you clarify for me the ADU bill that was passed in that final version? I know you can have it attached to a home, but can you also have it detached?
Yeah, that was a big change in the bill that passed last year, so that was
Yeah.
attached.
Yeah, separate entrance, and that has only just happened, and I think that the ADUs is probably what's going to be impactful in our region 9 the most. And it's gonna be in the larger lots where they can build those separate structures for their parents that already live nearby or their kids. I think that's gonna be really impactful, and it's not going to affect the neighborhoods as much because they just don't, they can't do more lot coverage, they're in the critical areas. I think that's a really good thing.
I think it also to verify, too, I think the ADU bill specifically excludes the critical area, not all.
That you can't do it.
I feel like some of them already exist, like you look at a lot of the smaller cottages, like Sugar Island, they already have like, I'm not sure if it's permitted or not, but like basically an ADU above the garage.
Yep.
Or,
To your point though, right now, if I understand the zoning, if you wanted to take a commercial property and add a couple of housing units, you still have to keep a percentage of that commercial.
Correct.
What did that do in terms of limiting? Could we be looking at the zoning so that if you wanted to take one of those strips along Deal Churchton Road that are semi-abandoned, there's not much there. Instead of having to keep commercial, could you convert that to a small apartment building?
Right, like six units, you know,
So,
3 units.
There's a region plan process, and we just went through region 4. The project, we're wrapping up now. One big proponent, one big idea that's constantly brought to the table with that SAC was basically evaluating the mixed use zoning designations, to make it more region 4, right? And because we currently now, I think mixed use, a lot of mixed use can go 150 feet tall. I don't think anybody on that SAC wanted 150 feet tall mixed use buildings, just like I don't think anybody here wants 150 feet tall mixed use buildings in region 9. So one recommendation that came out of that region, and it could come out of this as well, is to basically make in my words, a region 9 mixed use zoning designation. That would be applicable to the whole county, of course, but it would be up to a scale type system that would be appropriate for different areas in region 9. So that way we could come up with ideas to help have appropriate amounts of residential mixed with an appropriate amount of commercial along appropriate areas of road.
Would be a subset of the mixed use then.
Essentially, again, that would just be a recommendation. We wouldn't go into details through this process. It would be a recommendation for future politicians and staff to evaluate and potentially create, like they're doing in Morgan, potentially create a new zoning designation.
I don't see necessarily a problem with having like commercial on the bottom and then like, I mean, you see a lot of that in older town plans, like you have the shop and then you have the, what used to be somebody's house, the shop owner's house above it, which is now an affordable, semi-affordable rental unit. But like, I think for the business owner, it's probably just a question of like, introducing some county type of, program, maybe in the town center rollout that like makes it advantageous for the business owner to say, hey, I'm going to build a separate unit above my shop that I might not have thought about doing and create that extra stream of revenue.
I'm just suggesting a both and.
To the original point.
In addition to that as an option, for somebody who doesn't want to continue the rent with retail, to be able to convert to the kind of thing we're talking about.
So the redevelopment bill that just failed had that in it. Convert your shopping center to apartments. And it failed for different reasons, mostly because it had no affordable housing requirement in it. And I understand the county is gonna come back and try to come back to.
So what if you made it 50%? So like if you were looking at the bottom of like I know which shopping center you're talking about, and on the bottom it's still retail, but they were able to convert them to top half, that second story too. Because like I understand that you still want to have retail space available because like you need space, but I think there's got to be some happy medium, especially if we're talking about affordability and walkability and working. Like, they need to be.
I think that resonates with what Eric was suggesting before. This is what a lot of other jurisdictions do, is they have a zoning group that's been built for that kind of use. And it's one of those ironic things where, yeah, you mentioned, we used to build like that. Look at Old Town before 1950, we had modern zoning codes, and that was a common practice. We kind of zoned them out of existence by making these separated uses.
Harvard Center is designed to look like that, but it's all faux upstairs.
Most commercial zoning, D2 and above does allow all residential being workforce housing requirements.
Yeah, there were provisions that have been added to with our workforce housing bill in the past few years that allow more flexibility for that kind of development if it is workforce housing.
But they don't want to build for that.
I think, the county, if this is actually in the general government plan as well, they need to kind of just look at that mixed use zoning district and retool it to make it more scale based and be appropriate for small lots, small crossroads, small corridors, where you can have a mix of uses without, kind of being some massive development that can fit what the old Main Street used to look like.
And that's the scale for this part of the county.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need something smaller than the redevelopment bill, which was big lots. So if we had some way to enable smaller scale redevelopment.
Yeah.
Single building.
Yeah.
1 acre. We could make a lot of progress on that here without demolishing the neighborhoods.
And, as we've talked about it too, you know, you think about the where that applies. You know, and again, we can call it generalized places, or we can even specifically point out like the village center designations. Does it make sense in those village centers to allow that? And if so, we can take a look at the boundaries and keep that the right boundary to be moved.
Have you guys ever done any polling in the county to see like why like more than C2 types have not taken advantage of that, and like what would make it more, like what would make them more likely to take advantage of something, like what would be the dollar amount that they would like to see there, like an accounting offset or some type of program that would make them more advantageous, and it obviously comes down to like the dollar, it's not making sense, so like.
Yeah, that's the kind of analysis. I mean, I think there's been anecdotal work and kind of ad hoc work like that, but a rigorous analysis would be useful for that kind of.
Cause like, even that, the Royal Farms, like that still has proposed office space, like in addition, correct?
That's behind.
Yeah, behind it, and like, why not do something, like, what was like, how much more money are they projecting to get out of them? That it made it more advantageous for them to do office space instead of.
What's the rental rate, the occupancy rate for storefronts in Churchton deal right now? There's a lot of,
Available.
it's kind of okey-dokey right now.
Yeah, that's why I was like surprised when they even proposed that it was gonna be more office space. I was like, that's the last thing we need. So it's like, what's the cost idea there that made it so advantageous for these developers? Cause I mean, they're all dollars and cents guys, and they still. at the
But
end
it's
of the
in
day,
commercial. That's the buzz
Yeah.
that brings a certain look
Yeah,
to
but,
that piece of property.
but I mean, isn't it still like we talked, like commercial doesn't have to be hard commercial, so, but they still made it hard commercial. So like, I feel like it's a talk of it.
As our zoning code's gotten complicated, and this is my strength, not an easy view. I don't think one or two of some of these provisions are actually understood by the developers coming in. They see a commercial zone, they see it's commercial, they may not be looking 50 pages deep in the zoning, but realize, oh, there's a provision down here. I mean, 2.3.8.b that I can do something different.
Is that something that you guys could do, that you could have a developer education, like?
I don't know if we need that, I think. I don't know if we need that.
That's good. What you don't want, I mean, I could see this being, you've had to spend a small fortune on real estate lawyers to be able to write something that you wouldn't be writing loopholes into.
Sure.
But what you don't want to see, I don't want to like run down somebody else's where they live, but you go up to Glen Burnie and run down Mountain Road and all through that area, you can see where zoning's gone amok over different 20-year periods. You've had farms, marinas, junkyards, houses, liquor stores, crab shacks, you name it, they have it up there. And it all fits because it was all zoned different times, even on down Ritchie Highway. So it has its own little special spot in the zoning code for that area. So I see a real problem trying to like spot zone special little deals for infill to build in some kind of multi-family dwelling. But if the will's there, I'm sure we could do it.
If there's a way, it can be done.
But if there's a way it can be done, somebody's already trying to figure an angle to turn a clock on.
So earlier, Roger, you mentioned enforcement, and then, Audrey, you just mentioned education. I had a mentor one time tell me, there are 3 great E's of planning: education, engineering, and enforcement. And it's something, I try to like think about long term, right? Like, if we implement all 3 of those E's, there could be a really good planning process, right? I think we're trying to do the education component here and really help spread that word out. And obviously, the zoning code's massive. but I think we can make some recommendations potentially, or at least write it into the document, so the areas of concern or areas that should potentially be revisited, et cetera. How we can advance the vision of Region 9 as a whole. I know we are wrapping up for time here, so any ideas, any other housing ideas you guys have, get on to them. In March, we're gonna have, basically a smorgasbord of planning conversations. This will be a productive conversation, all 2.5 hours. Be able to really continue that. We'll talk more about that when we get closer. We'll get more information on that in the next meeting in February. But before we leave this, I want to give Jessie, for an opportunity to read everything she wrote down. She's been typing away, listening, and just to kind of recap everything we heard in the past minutes, so.
First, hi, Jessica Levy, Office of Planning and Zoning. So like I said, I was going to know the talk, and apologize if I didn't get things quite correctly, but I am totally open to fixing that at this moment in time. So area, when we were discussing, we talked about, some potential areas for housing, the areas outside of the critical area with existing sewer and water, connections. Which was really important to the group because of environmental protection. And some areas that were cited, I thought I heard Edgewater and Lodge. We also discussed how infill lots could be helpful, as long as the development was kept under 5 houses. There was mention of redevelopment and the appreciation of redevelopment over greenfield development or developing farms.
But I can maybe pause there. I think the comment about the infill and less than 5 houses is kind of more of a, that's what's happening with the market naturally, not necessarily what we want to see happening. But that's just what's, when it's currently set up, that's what's occurring.
So yeah, there's, back to the first bullet, but once you're finished with this one. So back to the first bullet, areas outside of the critical area with existing supporting infrastructure is what is really the point, not necessarily just sewer and water. We're talking traffic, schools, all of it.
Including, I mean.
And the water, I'm sure you went through a lot of the area. Right. Public water is only a small part of Region 9.
Yeah.
So I might want to take public water off, take public water off, but infrastructure grid broadly, I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, but writ large, the whole supporting.
Good so far, or do we need more changes?
Was it the Lodge Creek?
I don't know.
I know, I like it.
Yeah, you might have misheard something.
I was waiting for someone to tell me.
Well, just Edgewater.
This, again, we're gonna go back, this is the
Yes.
recording, so this is just kind of what we heard tonight, a quick minutes.
So, yeah. And so it's the infill lots and developments under, it's not, I can't remember, was it 4 or more triggers subdivision? Anything?
Yeah, the short subdivision, and then there's the.
Yeah, and so it's,
Jesse had also suggested there's parts of Shady Side, if we can do this on small enough scale.
So moving on, so we were talking about redevelopment over greenfield development or over converting farms. So this included mention of some underutilized businesses in Shady Side that can be redeveloped, or older dilapidated housing. There's more on redevelopment on the next slide. And then something mentioned at the end by Eric was the 3 days of planning. And so what I heard throughout our conversation was education for developers on what is permitted in the code already. Engineering for redevelopment of sites, that redevelopment over, greenfield development, and enforcement of existing ordinances.
Don't you think they already know that? I think the wizards, the developers and the engineers that work for the developers, they know every inch of it.
They have lawyers.
And they have really good lawyers.
The education I would like to see is for property owners, not the-
yes.
Yeah, if they do it wrong, they're doing it wrong on purpose.
And if they get it wrong, they have to redo it. And if they get it wrong, they have to redo it. That's the cost of doing business.
They get caught. God,
Yes,
it's
fine.
fine.
I see it.
So
Then we spent a lot of time talking about this idea of, small scale village centers or mixed use areas, particularly as, redevelopment sites. So we were talking about conversion of commercial or office space to residential on a small scale. I didn't list it here, but, I can add, we're simply talking about sites that aren't being used to their maximum potential. We're not trying to run out anybody's favorite store or anything like that. We're talking about potential new zoning designations to allow Region 9 scale mixed use. So that's once again, that smaller scale, they're going to have on the next bullet point, maybe 2 stories with commercial on the first floor and residential above. I put in a clarifying point that although we talked about this as like a village center-esque mixed use type development, that it doesn't just have to be limited to the official Plan 2040 village centers. It could be at other areas that meet criteria for good sites for potential redevelopment. So, those areas that are already established, maybe could use a little bit of redevelopment. Maybe that would be a good thing, even if it's not an official Plan 2040 village center. And then finally, the overarching view of neighborhood compatibility. We're looking to make things that, fit with the size and scale of our communities. We're not trying to draw multi-story apartment buildings in the middle of a farm. But, some potential things that went along with this neighborhood compatibility that weren't mentioned above or on the previous slide were the labor housing and the additional, which could provide additional revenue for farmers, but also help to keep it rural or keep the community rural. And ADUs on larger lots, which would allow smaller secondary units, as long as they're outside of the political area.
And again, these are just what we heard, this conversation. We're gonna go back, double check the recording, all that kind of good stuff, and we're gonna bring everything back to you guys in different ways. And tonight, we showed you a glimpse of just some of the econ strategies. We're gonna do the same with housing. This will be ever continually evolving, as I'm trying to say.
So I just want to comment, Jesse, thank you for doing that. That's very helpful. Really, thank you.
So I want to think about this, just like Kate was starting us out. If you look at Bassview, District 9 is very unique, and we all have talked about its attributes, its farms, its rural community, its waterfront, all those things, which are of high value, and particularly if you're living in a 1,000-foot house with you and your husband and 2 kids in Glen. What you have to do, what you need to do, get out, right? Take the kids somewhere where you can have an experience, where you can go by bicycles. So just because you didn't survive this area, doesn't mean it's still doesn't have value to the rest of the county. It needs a place to go and recreate and get out in nature and go hiking and ride their bikes. If you had a safe place to do it, and go pet the dogs, right? So I don't see why we have to do that. And if I was gonna put somebody in the house and they live in the next 20 years, I wouldn't put it down in the road. I'd put it on my back. Where there are resources, and they could potentially, the kids could walk to school, they could walk to the library, where they're focusing, and public transportation, where they can take to jobs in the city if they need it.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point to kind of segue into our next meeting, which is transportation, right? So when we talk about transportation, that'll be the final topical meeting of this process. And then in March, we can connect all those dots together and discuss what you just said, and potentially more in depth, right? Talk about your vision and how everything connects to one another. What does Region 9 look like? Is it full of bike paths to get people down here to help? That's the question. That's the question you're talking about, right? So, so keep that in mind as we move forward. So I'm gonna make a quick announcement. The next meeting is gonna be Thursday, February 1st. From 5:30 to 8:30, same time. And it's gonna be at the South County Senior Activity Center.
They have heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're gonna be more.
Yes.
Can we increase the budget so they can get their sheet billion?
Oh.
So, again, there's only gonna be one meeting in February,
Okay.
one meeting in February. March, we'll have one meeting as well, and that's gonna be it's the same date that we've had. We'll confirm the date and location at the next meeting for you guys. Everything's online, we'll send out the newsletter, but again, one meeting in February, February 1st, 5:30, 8:30, South County Senior Activity Center. We also have a drop-in session, staff will be hosting a drop-in session to discuss the economic development and housing. That's gonna be Tuesday, January 23rd, from 1 to 6:30 p.m. at the Edgewater Community Library.
Hold it, I missed that one. Run that by me again.
On the screen.
Oh,
Thank you.
and I
Are
was,
you gonna send these to?
Yeah, this will, and everything is on the website, so again, a great place to go, a great place to send your community members, your neighbors, is the Region 9 hub site.
I'll update the calendar invite and calendar on it, I think that's been helpful for you, the certified. And then with the, disclaimer, you know, the community drop session, we'd love to see you guys there. I always joke that it would be so unfortunate if we go out to these drop sessions and I sit there all day doing nothing. I want to see you guys, I want to public, I want to talk to people, but that being said, this is not like a SAC mandatory thing, we understand y'all have to work, or you might have other things to do, but if you wouldn't mind telling your community members about it, your friends, neighbors, colleagues, because like I said, if you want to see somebody.
And tell them they can show up anytime, not necessarily just at 1 o'clock. We don't want to rush it for 1 if we, go.
I want to reinforce that. I spent 2 or 3 hours at the Deal Library, and it was really helpful to talk to people about what their concerns were. You know, it's one of the places that they see the face of their neighbors and not just the staff of the county. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that they value what the staff of the county did. But we are here to represent them. And it's a really good chance to do one-on-one.
And to help with the information sharing, we are preparing flyers that will be print and digital, that will send you guys and to help put out.
so, and they're having the budget meeting now Tuesday?
Yes.
You talk about
Southern High School. I don't have the details on the.
Southern High School.
6 to 8 o'clock. District, it's not Region 9, it's District 7.
Right,
So it's Shannon Ledbetter's territory.
right, which we were on.
Yes.
So 6 to 9 next Tuesday, Southern High School, and I think they want me to sign up.
But you don't have to. They particularly want you to sign up.
The letter.
Pardon me?
6 to 8.
6 to 8.
6 to 8, but they do want you to sign up, right? They want people to make a reservation.
I think that's, I think.
Tuesday or Thursday? Tuesday or Thursday?
Are you driving?
So before we totally detach more content tonight, there's one more thought I had about focusing development. And that is around schools. You know, we have 2 or 3 sites for schools. I'm not sure whether Southern is I think the middle school is on the eastern side of Route 2, but those are places that have sewer and water. And they seem like places where people ought to live to walk to school. And teachers ought to be able to live to get to school. So back to what you were typing earlier, I would appreciate it if we could add, use schools as a center of gravity for housing.
Yes.
Even though those schools are in Region 8.
The middle school's at 8? I thought it's on our side of Route 2.
Like me.
It is on our side.
Yes,
I think
It's on our side of Route 2, but I don't know if that's the line.
We'll take a look at the line.
Okay, you may ask me my.
We can fudge the lines.
All right, one final thing, we are gonna open up the public comment, so if there's anybody online that wishes to speak, please use the raise hand feature function, and I will, vote you to be able to speak. I see 3 people online, but I do not see anybody who has raised their hand. All right, no, it looks like nobody wants to speak.
For the good of the order, before we come to a close, is there anything that, Matt, you want to take just a minute to talk about the two documents that you sent out?
Yeah, thank you. You've seen the Galesville Envision document. The Alliance for Livable Communities, which is mostly a Region 9 South County group, did an Envision South County document. And we in Mayo did an Envision Mayo document in 2019. And they all say essentially the same thing. That is, preserve the environment, preserve the character of what we have, keep the scale livable, and allow for moderated growth.
Yep.
And so they're up in the folder that I think Eric posted for us. Give them a quick look. They're worth a good scan. The Mayo document Anthony and I worked on, and we're particularly proud of that. The ALC document's good, and the Galesville document we saw last time was also really good. Thank you.
And that is all generated from public.
Oh, yeah, we had hundreds of people that
Yeah.
come and generate it.
Thank you for reminding us of good documents to add. For the meeting in February, BK did the last time. I did it tonight. A couple of people want to go together. We're looking for volunteers who want to feed the group.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, thank you. So, anything else for the good of the order? Yeah. Yeah, we do. If you want to help, that would be great. I'm looking for a volunteer to help take a case of water to that side. I have a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. All in favor? We'll be done.
Thank you all.
Good job, you guys.
This whole next time, quickly.